welcome everybody to Our Brains, Our Future. My name is Suzanne Dixon and I'm President of the European Brain Council. I warmly welcome you to this important event in which we address an undeniable major issue: how to improve patient outcomes for the estimated 190 million Europeans that are living with a brain disorder, neurological and mental alike. In our lifetime, 1 in 3 of us will suffer from a brain disorder. It's an honor to be hosting this important event together with our co-organizers, the Spanish National Research Council and the Spanish Brain Council. We thank you for your organization and participation. So if we are to promise our citizens that we're going to do something to tackle the burden of brain disease, there's only one tenable solution, and that's to enable the brain research community to reach their full potential. We're here to discuss that today, amongst other things, but I want to ask, how are we going to achieve this? What's our solution? Well, first of all, we need considerably increased support for brain research and innovation. It needs to become a priority with the full force and commitment of the European Union and member states. There's no medical, scientific, economic, or societal reason to explain why the brain is under-researched and why brain research is underfunded. This makes no sense. Brain disease poses too high a burden on individuals, their families, on healthcare systems, and on society. Moreover, it's a well-known fact that the cost of brain research is significantly more, as much as double than for all other disease areas. We need more dialogue. We need to bring all stakeholders together in the brain space to the same table. This is the researchers, the clinicians, the patients, industry, and other professional organizations, as well as regulators and policymakers. We need to foster dialogue and increase knowledge exchange that allows for new ideas, creation of new ideas and innovation. The realization that basic research, especially animal research, is crucial to make us progress in this field and inform policymakers and politicians is really important, and it's been threatened in the EU. Almost everything that we know about brain health and brain disease and its treatment is founded in basic animal research and requires validation in animal models. In fact, we're going to continue to need basic animal research until such times as all brain disease can be prevented or treated. Ladies and gentlemen, honourable colleagues and guests, what I've just been describing is essentially the core of the very mission of the European Brain Council, an organisation that's dedicated to advocacy and policy activities that promote brain research, engage relevant stakeholders, and foster dialogue and knowledge exchange. Today, it's important that we not only discuss problems, but that we also find solutions. So I wish you a successful meeting. Thank you for your participation and for the invite to the Spanish Senate to discuss these important issues. So I'd like to now welcome Professor Joan Lerma, who is the Vice President of the European Brain Council, to say a few words. Joan.
Thank you, Suzanne. Buenos días a todos. Hemos llegado a la
Good morning, everybody. We've come to the agreement that Spaniards will speak Spanish and other people will speak English, but we have interpreters, so I don't think there's going to be any problems. I wanted to wish you a very warm welcome. I thank you very much for joining us today, and I want to thank all of those who have agreed to present their experiences at this meeting. And this gratitude I would like to extend it to all patients because the focus of this seminar is precisely patients. We want to improve patients' lives. But since you can't start building your house from the roof, you've got to start with the foundations. And so, as Suzanne was saying, we need to strengthen research, we need to increase knowledge in order to tackle brain disorders. And Suzanne also said that there's 190 million patients in Europe with mental disorders, and finding a solution is urgent because from the socio-economic point of view, this imposes a huge burden. I have some figures here that were published a few years ago. The cost of brain disorders, this encompasses mental and non-mental disorders, is of 800 billion euros a year. And of course, since we don't make this amount every day, it's difficult to imagine how much money this is. But this is the same amount as the European Union has devoted to the whole of Europe to recover Europe after the pandemic, after the crisis of COVID, in the Renew Europe Fund, 806 billion. So it's the same amount. So that huge amount of money that Europe is devoting to recover the European economy is what brain disorders cost every year. So this needs to be taken into account, and so we need to strengthen research, and that's precisely the purpose of today's meetings. We need the basic research, clinical research. We need the collaboration from patients and the collaboration from industry. This is another thing we need to talk about, because generating a drug in this field is 3 times as expensive as creating a drug for any other disease. So this means that the pharma industry is reluctant to invest in these areas, and this slows down the development of drugs that may help patients with brain disorders. And that's all I wanted to say. I'm very thankful to the Senate for letting us use this wonderful hall. And without further ado, I would like to wish you a very fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. And now I would like to invite Professor Carlos Closa, Vice President of the Spanish National Research Council, to say a few words.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've been asked to speak in Spanish, so let me just switch my home language. But let me first to thank you and congratulate you for this event and for coming here and for accepting the invitation of Juan Lerma to chair it. I think it's a very important conference and will be really remembered as a successful event. Now in Spanish,
I'm here representing the CSIC, the Spanish Research Council. I'm sure that most of you know what the Spanish Research Council is, but for courtesy with our foreign guests, I will explain what we do. We have 14,000 researchers across all areas of knowledge. Unlike universities, we don't teach. We are not a teaching organization. We are more similar to the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And as I was saying, the CSIC covers the whole of the research areas. If you look at our balance sheet, apart from the law and psychology, apart from law, I would say that we cover all other areas of knowledge and fields of inquiry. And an area that is extremely important for us is what we could call the brain or neurosciences. In fact, one of the white papers that we have used to outline the future of research in Spain is titled Brain, Mind and Behaviour. And this white paper establishes the directions of research in the future. And Juan Lerma, for example, has actively participated in the creation of this white paper. And well, we're very clear that research on neurosciences and the brain plays a very important role for CSIC. We have two institutes which are fully devoted to this topic, which is the Neurosciences Institute in Alicante and the Cajal Institute here in Madrid. And very soon there's going to be a third institute, the International Center for Neurosciences, led by Professor Lerma. We hope it is going to be up and running next year. So this shows how committed CSIC is with the research into the brain, and this has also been reflected into the creation of a multidisciplinary platform called Neuroaging, which places the focus on the multidisciplinarity, on the multidisciplinar nature of this type of research. The platform seeks to understand the mechanisms behind neuron aging and trying to find ways of improving the quality of life of an increasingly aged population. And for this, molecular techniques have to be developed to tackle the neurological problems associated with aging. CSIC shares the philosophy behind this seminar today. There are four goals that we follow and which are extremely important to underscore and to remember. The first one was mentioned by Suzanne. Brain disorders are key challenges for health, not just because of cost, but also because of their prevalence. The figures are really terrifying. There's 1 billion people in the world with neurological diseases and a huge amount with mental disorders. This was in 2019. And in Europe, 70% of the population, of the elderly population, live with a neurological disease. These are worrying figures and should make us reflect about how important this topic should be for research. And the second goal, which has also been mentioned, is that in spite of the fact that there have been key advances in the field of neuroscience, they're still insufficient. And I don't want to run on, but obviously this means that we need to increase the resources devoted to promoting cutting-edge research and basic research in this area. Thirdly, and I think that this is not a trivial thing, research into neurosciences is very important for the future generations, not just because it may be very interesting for researchers as a professional field, but also because we know that new generations are more exposed to certain neuronal disorders. Today in the newspaper there was an article saying that it has been detected that new generations have been more affected by the pandemic, and there's a higher incidence of mental diseases in younger people. So this means that we need to focus all our efforts on this area. And the fourth goal of this meeting, I share it fully, which is that Europe needs to lead research in this area. And for this, it's very important to improve collaboration between different countries, and this, I think, is going to be a wonderful way of reaching our goals. So this conference comes at a very important time, and I'm sure that it's going to be very successful. I want to repeat my thankfulness to Suzanne, and I want to wish you a very fruitful seminar. Thank you.
Sí, sin más dilación.
Without further ado, thank you very much, and I will introduce the first speaker, Professor Richard Morris. Richard Morris is one of the most renowned world scientists. He has made key contributions to the understanding of memory. And just to give you an idea, he is a fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine. He is also a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. He holds, he's commander of the Order of the British Empire. He also is a member of the School of Sciences of the United States. He received the Bull Prize, which is considered the Nobel Prize in Neurosciences in 2016, and he's linked to Spain through director of the chair of neurobiology, Carlo Armelo, of the Institute of Neurosciences. And he's also a very good friend of ours, and I'm very thankful to him for having been kind enough to come all the way to Madrid to give this talk and explain to us, or talk to us, about the complexities of the brain. Richard, you have the floor. Thanks.
Ahora en inglés. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about this, the stuff inside our heads. And it consists of 100 billion brain cells, which are very small, 25 millionths of a meter in size. 5,000 synaptic connections per cell, and they are in nanometer dimensions. And these all connected together in so many connections, it would take ages to count them. And somehow all of this packed into 1.4 kilograms. And this thing consists of neural networks that are made up of brain cells whose neural activity in some sense represents the experience of your life, and whose structure and connectivity changes with experience and also with disease. Now, modern brain imaging techniques are giving us new insights into the brain. This is an image called diffusion tensor imaging, which is showing up in different colors the various pathways that exist within the brain. And this is an imaging technique which is extremely useful for neurologists and radiologists as they look at changes in the brain associated with disease. Now, this is my own brain. I was given it as a present when I was a subject in an experiment at the Massachusetts General Hospital of Harvard University about 25 years ago. And I show it to you because, you'd probably like to know that the person speaking to you actually does have a brain. And I had the privilege of presenting this at my inaugural lecture as a professor in Edinburgh. And it was great because my mum and dad were there, my parents were there. And of course, I'd given my parents many reasons to doubt that I had a brain inside my head. So I presented this proudly to them in the audience, saying, here's the evidence, I really have one. At which point my father, in a very loud voice, said, no proof that is working, my boy. So let's turn to the founding father, Santiago Ramon y Cajal. And he stared down his microscope, and in the image on the left, he saw, using this classic Golgi technique, individual cells. And Golgi is clever because it only stains about 1 in 100 cells, so you can actually see the neuropil. And from that, in the middle, he made these amazing drawings, and these drawings were done from many different animal species, and he also color-coded them in some later drawings, as you see at the right. Now, he learned the Golgi technique from Luis Cimaro, who is a Madrid psychiatrist, and he was enthusiastic about that technique, and Cajal used it to make some of the most famous drawings, which many of you will know, of the cerebellum on the left, which is at the back of the brain and is involved in motor control, and the hippocampus at the bottom, which is involved in memory. Now, this Golgi technique is fantastic, but of course, over the years, the 100 years since, all sorts of new techniques have come along. And here, for example, is another picture of the hippocampus, stained in a different way to show up different pathways and different contents. And top left, we now have a fluorescent image of an individual Purkinje cell with its myriad of dendrites that are so important for the fine timing of motor control. So here's the man himself, sitting at a table with his microscope. And I ask you to look closely at this image because, to my eyes, maybe not to yours, he looks very like Lionel Messi, the Barcelona footballer. So Cajal was a man who was ahead of his time, a good career move, but 100 years earlier than necessary. Now, he wrote exactly 100 years ago amazing book called Advice to a Young Investigator. I have a copy here. And it's well worth reading. I even get my students to read it. And there are a number of different passages that jump off the page. And I thought I'd share one with you because I'm British. It would be silly to ignore the fact that often we've had to put up with the old-fashioned rhetoric of certain politicians with no orientation towards Europe, and thus no hope of promoting the intellectual awakening of our country. By that he meant Spain. However, such government officials focused on ways of the past and devotees of tradition who are suspicious of modern culture have all but disappeared. That's true, except in my own country, sadly. Now, there are lots of other bits of the book which are fun. And there's one particular chapter, chapter 6, which is infamous amongst scientists, where he offers advice on how an investigator should choose a wife. Well, there we are. I mean, he was a man of his time, but he was also ahead of his time, and a fantastic founding father for all of us. But using modern electron microscope techniques, using modern stains, using contemporary techniques which are developing all the time, we're able to get insights into the structure at a level that he would be amazed with. So this particular image was made by Kristen Harris, who's a very well-known neuroanatomist, and what she's done is made a 3D rendering of this section of the dendrite. The dendrite's in yellow, the dendritic spines and their terminals are in red, the axonal connections are in green, and then you'll see some glial cells, which are the sort of glue cells, appear in blue, all constructed from electron micrographs. But let me point out, the entire image is the size of a single red blood cell, 8 millionths of a meter. So let's see if this works. So how do you get those data? What you get it from is from electron micrographs, which you'll see now. Cell body still in yellow, connections in green, glial cells in blue. Amazing reconstructions of this kind, done of course in animal tissue, but really giving us an insight into this astonishing organ of the body. Now, neuroscience depends upon working at lots of different levels of analysis. I've been focusing there on the synaptic and neuronal level, which is near the bottom of this famous diagram from Churchill and Sanofsky. And you can go down to the gene level, or you can go up to the full brain level, which of course is the level at which neurologists and neurosurgeons are working. And what we try to do is to link these levels together. And you can't link these levels together if you only work at one level. You have to be open-minded to think of lots of different levels at which this science can develop. And we also have to think about development. We have to think about what the brain does, its function. What are the mathematical algorithms that these circuits are actually performing? What are the underlying molecular mechanisms? And of course, what happens when the brain degenerates in disease? So just an example is the fact that the structural biologists are now getting into the game. And here, for example, is a nanoscale representation of a particular receptor for glutamate, which is the excitatory transmitter of the brain, done at the level of structural biology. Now, I've long been interested in a structure in the medial temporal lobe called the hippocampus. And we know from lots of evidence over the last 50 years that the hippocampus is crucial for memory. And that's come from patient studies as well as from supporting animal work. And of course, we can look at it at this level, this global level, or as I've been trying to explain to you, the need to look at it also at the cellular level. And here's an image from my own laboratory taken by Francesco Gobbo, my Italian postdoc, showing the pyramidal cells and some other associated neurons. And what it does, this structure, is it does what we call episodic memory, memory for single events. And then it sends the information to the cortex to help us build up semantic knowledge. So if we think about memory, it's often a conscious act of remembrance of events, places, facts, and skills. And here's Angela Merkel on November the 9th, 1 year, with her lit candle, which she's placing beside the memorial of the Berlin Wall. Of course, Angela Merkel was brought up in East Germany. So this was a poignant moment for her, and one wonders what she was thinking about. Perhaps many of the friends she may have lost during the troubled time before. On a happier note, my first job was at the University of St Andrews, and St Andrews is the home of golf, and I had the privilege of watching Seve Ballesteros win the 1984 Open. And this particular photograph is very famous because he walked through what's called the Valley of Death. He had one putt to win the competition, and he punched the air, and lots of photographers captured that. Now, it's a unique event. There was no trial too, but I bet Seve remembered that moment for the rest of his life. And the idea that there are these decisive moments in our lives which define our individuality has been captured by many artists over the years. And here, the famous phrase from Henri Cartier-Bresson, who only died a few years ago at the age of about 104, of the little garçon with his van ordinaire, which he's probably taking to his granny. Very proud moment. Captures Parisian society. And the way we remember this is through changes in the connectivity of these individual dendritic spines. So to understand these processes, we need to get down to that level and to see how the number of receptors at the basal level may increase through potentiation to store information or decrease to lose information. And again, we can look at it at the synaptic and receptor level using elegant pharmacological techniques, or we can even go down, as I described earlier, to the molecular level. But we can also go up and look at the circuit. And if you look at the circuit inside the hippocampus, as many anatomists have done over the years, what you find, and it's, I think, amazing, is you find a distributed associative arrangement which is very like brain-inspired artificial intelligence, which of course hits the news now. And the artificial intelligence people, such as Google DeepMind based in London, are drawing upon insights from brain anatomy to create the products that we are all going to use, worrying as it may be for many of you. So that's on a happier note, but what about the losing of memory? And I come now shortly to the end. Now, first of all, not all loss of memory is associated with disease, and I think it's quite an important point to take on board. We all forget all the time, don't we? And in fact, it's a perfectly natural process. And Daniel Schachter wrote a wonderful book called The 7 Sins of Memory about the benign loss of memory that we all show: transience, absent-mindedness, blocking, misattribution, suggestibility, bias, persistence, and so on. And he made the argument through this book that these are all features of an otherwise well-tuned system. So by misattribution, to give one example, it's when you have the embarrassment of telling a joke that you've just learned back to the person who just told it to you. That kind of thing, you know? And we all do it. But of course, there comes a moment when the loss of memory may be more severe. And Alzheimer's disease was first identified about 115 years ago. 2022, it's affecting 55 million people worldwide. And to date, there are some treatments, but not really effective treatments. We need to develop those and to understand these. And we also need to recognize, as I'm sure the social care system does here in Spain, that it's a disease that affects the carers as much as the victim. It goes through stages. There's a forgetful early stage, and then confusion, and then severe dementia, and a terminal final stage. Now, it's a very, very active area of research here in Spain, throughout Europe, and across the world. And it involves not just neuroscientists, but human geneticists who are discovering various mutations that are potentially responsible as causative changes in the disease. So starting in this diagram, you've got the possibility of some gene defect that might be a cause. And this, in Alzheimer's disease, may lead to the accumulation of the famous A-beta peptide, which, if it accumulates too much, creates plaques. And then there are neuronal injury, maybe changes in what's called tau, another molecule which is important inside cells. But the challenge for the biochemists who are working on this is to work out what's chicken and what's egg. And that's very hard. Maybe the initial stages of plaque accumulation are compensatory. That's a possibility. But then again, maybe not. So these are extremely difficult things to study. You can't study them just with end-state pathology. You have to do more than that. And that may involve using particular imaging compounds in the human brain, or it may involve using animal models. So what I'd like to do is to show you now a film that was made by Bateman and published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2012. And they're using the famous Pittsburgh B compound, which visualizes plaques in people while they're alive. Now, the study was put together using a cross-sectional technique, but it's shown in a longitudinal manner. But people widely accept the data. And the key point is that the film starts 25 years before diagnosis. 25 years before diagnosis. So let's go. Not much yet. We're at 20 years before. 15 years before, things are happening. 10 years before. Appreciable levels of amyloid plaques. 5 years before. At the time of diagnosis and after. So that, plus the data in their paper, which others have followed up in detail, indicates there are a lot of changes that are accumulating prior to diagnosis. And I think one of the difficulties that the pharmaceutical industry faces in testing compounds is that they can only test them in patients who've already been diagnosed. And there's a danger that that's too late. So there are all sorts of studies going on. There are strikingly some villages in Colombia, in South America, where something like a third of the people get Alzheimer's disease. And that makes it possible financially to do a longitudinal study. So that's the kind of thing people are trying to do to get at these earlier stages. But I want you to realize that Alzheimer's, together with many other brain disorders, is a terrifying ordeal for everybody. So let's just listen for a few moments to the words of Nancy Reagan.
What have you learned about this disease?
That is probably the worst disease you can ever have.
Why?
Because you lose contact and you're not able to share. In our case, you're not able to share all those wonderful memories that we have. And we had a wonderful life.
Can you have a conversation that makes sense to you with the president?
Not now. No.
The letter itself, what were the circumstances in which he wrote the letter? Were you with him when he wrote it?
I was with him. We were in the library, and he was sitting at the table in the library, and he sat down and wrote it. And that was it.
First draft?
First draft. He crossed out one word there, or two. I think it's one or two words. I don't know what that was. But only Ronnie could write a letter like that.
So there is hope. The work of human geneticists in conjunction with neuroscientists has identified opportunities, at least with certain forms of Alzheimer's disease. And published just last year was the clinical report of the effectiveness of lecanemab, which, interestingly, given the argument I'm putting to you, is effective in patients with the very earliest stages of Alzheimer's disease. So to end, what are my take-home messages? Many European scientists have played an absolutely critical role in creating our contemporary understanding of the brain through their fundamental research. Cajal himself, Spain's first Nobel Prize winner, Riti Levi-Montalcini, Alan Hodgkin and Andrew Huxley, Arvid Carlsson in Sweden, Tim Bliss and Tario Lomo, who discovered long-term potentiation, Bert Sackman and Erwin Neer, who won the Nobel Prize for developing patch clamping, Edvard and May-Britt Moser for their discovery of GLING. So I think European scientists have a key place to play, and I very much hope that that will continue. So we've got to support fundamental research, but not just for them, but because the findings of such work are delivering products, such as opportunities for translating fundamental discoveries into therapies for the common good. Memantine for Alzheimer's disease was developed in Germany. The action of ketamine as an NMDA receptor antagonist, its mode of action was discovered in the UK. So, gracias.
So thank you so much, Professor Morris, for this outstanding lecture today. You've taken us on a journey through the brain, a historical journey, and also a journey through from basic research through to a hopeful message that the investment can bring about a better understanding of disease and lead to new treatments. Thank you very much. So now we move on to the session 1. We have a round table discussion. Healthy body, healthy brain, protecting our most valuable asset. And we hear the patient perspective. And I hand over to Dr. Osman Khan. He's the chair of Motor Neuron Disease Association, and he's going to be chairing this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, and buenos dias, everyone. Good morning. I think after Professor Morris's absolutely, I was spellbound listening to that presentation. And just to be able to build on that, what we're going to do over the next 40 minutes is hear from the people with those brains who are affected by neurological conditions. So we're going to spend 40 minutes, and we have myself and then three speakers who are all going to talk from their own patient perspective about what it is to live with a neurological condition. And we have Rosa Montero, Esia de la Iglesia, myself, and then Tinka Molema, who will be speaking. If possible, I think there's a slide which I wanted to be able to use. Let's see if it works. If it doesn't, I'm fine. I will give it a minute. The slide was, we don't need it because, oh, there we go. We do have a slide. And this is just something you'll see that I was introduced by Suzanne as being chair of the Motor Neuron Disease Association, which Spanish colleagues may also know as ALS. But I'm also someone who has and continues to be living with MS. I've had multiple sclerosis for over 25 years. So I'm someone who has worked in the health policy space, but has also worked and lived with a neurological condition for all that time. And I think it reflects very well on the Spanish National Research Council and EBC that they're asking us to speak at this point. And you'll see up there what I think helps us to be able to understand two things. One is that, and I think this is something that is quite new and is a very positive development, that we are now hearing the patient voice. And we're hearing the patient voice at all levels. We hear the patient voice when I go in as a patient to be able to see my neurologist. My neurologist will listen in a different way and will ask different questions. And it's much more about co-creating an understanding of where I am and my journey, and to be able to understand how I can move forward with it most positively. But also about bringing in the patient perspective. And you can see around that ring that there are a lot of different elements that can be involved, that we as patients, we now have our voice, and we can bring our voice into a multitude of different areas. And I don't have time to be able to go through all of these, but I think I was particularly struck by a patient who had to use a colostomy bag because of his condition, not a neurological condition. I mean, he had to use a colostomy bag. And the one thing he didn't know was, when did he need to empty it? And no one who had ever thought of developing these bags had ever thought that a patient needs to know when to empty them. And he went ahead and actually set up a company which then puts a monitor that tells you on your smartphone that you need to go and find a restroom to be able to empty the bag. And that idea of the patient perspective coming into medical design is one element that you can have. You will also see the pharmaceutical industry has engaged very positively in understanding on clinical trials how the patient-related outcome measures an incredibly important part of being able to assess the effectiveness of drugs. So they are looking at clinical endpoints with their trials, but they're also understanding patient-related outcome measures. And I'm doing some work with the Italian Multiple Sclerosis Society at the moment, and the Charcot Foundation, looking at patient-related outcome measures and how those can be used not just in clinical settings, but all the way up into policy settings. So policymakers are also thinking, what is it that I need to know about the patient experience that will help me to make decisions on resource allocation, help me to make decisions on health priorities. So we're seeing all those elements, but we also need to recognize that we're becoming public with our illness. It's interesting for me, I reflect now that I moved into health policy 25 years ago when I was diagnosed with MS, because I thought I worked in public policy. And I thought, well, maybe I should work in health policy because I'm obviously going to have to be thinking about health in a way that I didn't think I would need to think about it for the rest of my life. I would have symptoms, I would have to have medication, I would have to deal with it in a different way. But I didn't tell anyone that I worked with. I was working with all these health policy makers, clinicians, and I didn't feel comfortable. I have to say, I wondered whether they would judge me. And they'd look and say, well, I wonder whether he's tired today, or I wonder if when he moves his arm, is that tremoring? And I just thought I didn't want that. So it was only, I was very honest to be the European Patients Forum's executive director. And when I took up that role was when I actually felt I needed to come out and say, yes, and I am actually a patient who lives with a long-term neurological condition. But it's an interesting journey. It will be interesting to hear from colleagues now as to how they have gone through that journey and how they feel they have to sort of live as being patients as well as being people. And I think that's key to it. So I will leave my comments there, and I will hand over to Rosa for our...
Hi, hola, thank you very much. Hola, buenos días a todos.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for including me in this event, which is so interesting, very interesting. So I was assigned to the Crazy People's panel, and I'm very honored to be here because I had an encounter with mental disease. There's many people that have encountered mental diseases. And the figures mentioned here, I think, have been understated. Before the pandemic, the WHO said that 25% of the world population was going to experiment sooner or later in their lives a mental disorder. This means that a lot of people are going to either suffer from a disease of this kind by themselves, or have somebody near them suffering from a mental disease. I was hit by a mental disease. What I had was panic crisis, panic disorders from the age of 16 to the age of 30. Not all the time, because it would have been too disabling, but at different, for long periods. Panic disorders, as you know, are very closely related to anxiety. But panic is crazier, a little crazier. It's a little bit more separated from reality. It has more dissociation and depersonalization. I was living with my parents back then. I was 16. It was at night. The television was on, and without anything special happening, nothing at all, nothing special, suddenly the world disappeared, the room disappeared, and it moved to the other side of a black tunnel. This is the tunnel effect. So the room, so suddenly just left me, and I, of course, left reality. And this was accompanied by a huge panic. I didn't know, my legs started shaking. I couldn't stand. My chin also trembled. My teeth chattered. And then there was a more specific panic, because I thought, I've just gone mad. I've just gone bonkers. Otherwise, how can I explain this? So the feeling is that a giant comes and kicks you, and then kicks you out of the world without any justification at all. And so, and there we get to something essential, what we wrongly call madness, because this is really a colossal feeling of loneliness, but it is a kind of loneliness which, if you haven't been there, you can't imagine. I'm sure that amongst you there's many people that have been there, but if you have not been there, you'd have no idea of what kind of loneliness I'm talking about. To know what kind of loneliness I'm talking about, you need to have gone through that, because it is not this existential loneliness vis-a-vis death, which may be terrible. I don't like death at all, but death is the most human fact that you can think of, because everybody dies. But mental disorders cheat you, because they tell you that you are the only person feeling what you're feeling, and nobody else has felt it or will feel it. But this is a lie, but that's the way you feel. And that is why it's this, difficult to express, because how can you tell other people about this if you're a Martian? You don't, a Martian who can't even speak the Martian language. So I haven't found any way of explaining that absolute loneliness, except for the metaphor of an astronaut that has the hose that connects him with the Earth cut off, and suddenly has to navigate in the darkness. And this complete loneliness that drives you out of the world and drives you out of the human species entails a huge psychological pain. And that huge loneliness and that huge pain are compounded by social loneliness, because people, in addition to holding out their hand or helping that astronaut connect the hose back to its original position, what do people do? They kick people with mental disorders, because there's stigma, there's discrimination, there's rejection, and there's abandonment. And these people are condemned to living in hell. In my days and in my social class, nobody took you to the shrink. I passed all my panic crisis without any medication. But, this at least gives you the hope that even without drugs, you can get over these diseases. But what I did was I studied psychology to see what was wrong with me. So I went to university, and I think that 98% of psychologists study psychology because they think they are crazy, which is not bad, really, because it makes them feel closer to their patients. And when I learned what was wrong with me in the 4th course of psychology, I dropped out of university. And why haven't I had any new crises? Well, I've often wondered it. My crisis disappeared when I was 30. They could always come back. Nothing would happen. Partly, I think I stopped having crises because I got used to them, because in some way I lost fear. You have to lose fear to fear. You have to lose your fear of fear, and you have to learn to live with that suitcase full of loneliness. But in addition, I think that this is related to the fact that even if I, like the majority of novelists, I am a novelist in case you don't know, the majority of novelists started writing when we were children. I started when I was very young, but I didn't start publishing novels until I was 30. And I think that that was essential, because a novel, it allows you to take something. It's like taking a part of your burning heart and bringing out into the world. Philippe Renaud, the psychiatrist, says that novels are controlled delusions, self-provoked delusions. So you take that controlled delusion out, and then people tell you, I felt what you felt. What moves you also moves me. And this attaches you to the earth. It's a way of grabbing that astronaut and bringing him back down and attach him to the earth. So there's this absolute need of social inclusion, without which there's no possible solution to mental problems, I can assure you. Right, and stigma is very close. This stigma is closely related with something that happened 2 centuries ago. And I liked what Juan Lerma said before, because we've always known that mental diseases is like a body disease. The Greeks considered that depression was an excess of black bile. And two centuries ago, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, 2 centuries ago, suddenly mental diseases became something esoteric. Nobody knew where they came from, and this increased the guilt feeling of patients. So Professor Lerma today gave a global figure of neurological diseases, including mental diseases. That's very... Yeah, because mental diseases are diseases of the body. All mental diseases are caused by problems in neurological connections. Naturally, of course, in any bodily disease, the environment plays a role. What your experiences play a role, of course, like in any other disease, like cancer. Your lifestyle has a huge influence, but please do not discriminate against patients. And finally, I just want to say and repeat once again that there is no solution to this huge pain, which is if there can't be any solution if there is no global solution. You need to educate people to lose fear and to understand what mental diseases mean, so that they embrace patients. We need to educate the media so that they convey an accurate image. And of course, a lot more money is needed. In Spain, for example, we are far below the other countries in terms of the number of specialists. 3 times fewer clinical psychologists than the EU average, and so we need a lot more money for doctors, a lot more money for research, a lot more money for looking for or finding appropriate drugs, and patients themselves need to be more open about their problems. but that should be the last requirement, because of course, how can you ask people who suffer stigma to come out and say what happens to them if nobody will understand what they are going through? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. That was amazing in terms of the insight, the passion, the commitment, and also that making those calls, the advocacy. And I think that advocacy part of it is really what drives a lot of us as patients, that we really want to be able to advocate to ensure that others are supported from research to care. I'm going to move over now to Asia de la Iglesia. It was funny, Asia, we didn't speak, but we smiled at each other, and then we're connected through a common condition, not connected through both being international basketball players, though. So over to you, Asia.
Well, people used to ask me, what do you do for a living? I said, I play basketball. And now people ask me, and I don't really know what to say. When I was 21, I was in front of the television set, and I realized, that I couldn't press the buttons on the remote control. And, part of my body went numb. And my physical therapist said that it could be a nerve problem, a kind of, But, I was very lucky because I was immediately referred to the neurologist, and then I was given an MRI, and like 3 weeks elapsed before I was diagnosed with MS. And I said, but what is MS? And, they said it's a neurodegenerative disease with no cure. And I was not used to this, because whenever I had a sprain in the ankle or I had a flu, there was always a solution for everything. But now it was the first time that I had been told that there was no solution to my problem. And even today, when I say MS, well, when you hear the word MS, you imagine a person with a cane or in a wheelchair, but nobody realizes. But most of my symptoms go unnoticed. Nobody knows that I have problems with my bladder. Nobody knows that I'm blind in my left eye, but I have 48% disability. So when we and it's difficult because they see me playing basketball and nobody believes that there is a lot of things wrong with me. And it was not easy for me to learn to play basketball with this disease, because to play basketball, it's difficult because you've got to have sensitivity in your fingers. And when I left hospitals, my lectures are normally an hour and 30 minutes, and here I was told I should speak for only 10 minutes. I left hospital, I was walking in the street, and people in my village, they said, Asier, how are you doing? And I can't really say, I'm doing fine. I said, no, I have MS. And people just hugged me and they started crying without knowing what it was, because it sounded very bad, but nobody really knew what it was. It's always been said that you shouldn't Google your disease on the internet. But of course, you shouldn't read the different fora. But now there are official pages where they are going to convey all the right information. And the next day I said, I need to go to the MS association of my province. In those days, I lived in San Sebastian, in the north of Spain. And, when you're 20 years of age, you don't want to go to a place where you're going to see a lot of people that are very, very ill. You don't want to see what you're doomed to experience. But I did want to go. And I remember I spent the whole day in this association, and I realized that having that disease didn't mean that I couldn't be happy, because those people who were terminally ill, who couldn't even speak anymore, were happy. So many of them were happy. So So I said, I realized that I had an option to be happy. And then the fears that people with diseases have, especially these types of diseases, we have the fear of, what is going to happen in the future. But I didn't know what was going to happen with me. All my fears had to do with my mobility, but now I have no problems with mobility. So the fears you have do not normally come true. When I went to the neurologist, I remember, I said, "Can I still play basketball?" Well, and 11 years elapsed, and but I'm still playing basketball. So nobody knows about the future. Not even the scientists. Nobody knows. So when people hugged me in the street and they were crying, but that has changed completely. When people see me now, they don't take pity on me. But that first day, well, I couldn't know what to tell people because I don't know what my disease means. So at that time, I decided to find out as much information as possible. I spoke to researchers, neurologists, etc., because I wanted to know as much as possible about my disease. And now, 10 years later, when I speak about my disease, nobody takes pity on me. Well, some things may happen. Right? In certain situations. For example, I remember once I was playing a basketball team, and I pissed in my pants. But that is just episodic. I have a disease which is, of course, a limiting disease in some situations, but I don't feel I am overcome by the disease. And whenever people give me a prize for being so enduring, I don't really understand it. I never thought that the disease would prevent me from living a normal life. And I remember, when I was diagnosed, my team, no teams wanted to hire me. So it was not me, it was people around me that limited me. Of course, it is, and this is because of ignorance, because people don't know really what, the disease means. I didn't at the beginning. I didn't know the first thing about the disease. I was not a doctor. The only thing I wanted is empathy. Empathy is very important because I've always, people kept telling me, you can't do this, you can't do that. And I always said, I'm going to try it because I'm all for trying to achieve your dreams and make your dreams come true. And when in those days, nobody wanted to hire me, a few years later, I showed everybody that you could overcome your limitations, and I went back to playing in the professional league 4 years later. People kept saying, no, you can't do it, no, you can't do it, forget about this, and in the end, I managed to do it. And I'm going to speak about research. My project is, I have a project which is called Dance with MS, Baila con EM. The idea is to raise money. We organize different campaigns trying to raise money. I've never received any subsidy or any donation. What I do is I sell a product that people buy, and then, that money is donated to this cause. And during COVID, I donated 100,000 euros to research into multiple sclerosis. And now and once I did that, I said, now I want to donate 1 million euros. But of course, it's difficult to raise 1 million euros selling T-shirts. So I created an ecological beer called Mudica, which comes from Sanskrit. It's a way of expressing the idea of being happy for other people's successes. So it's a beer called Mudika. It's only sold over the internet. So this is a short summary of what I went through. I managed to overcome all my fears, because when you break your cruciate ligament or the fibula, etc., when you go back to playing, you're not afraid because you don't think you're going to have another injury. But with MS, you always have this uncertainty. 2 months ago, I went blind of the left eye, but I didn't stop doing things, thinking about all the bad things that may happen to me. Because if I had done that 10 years ago, I wouldn't have done so many things. Whenever I need help, I ask for help, but I don't anticipate myself to those things. And this is a lesson I learned from basketball, from teamwork, because in MS we keep talking about drugs, but then there's 4 legs. The psychological component, physical preparation, nutrition, mental health, and the medication, of course, you take every day. But without the other components, it would not be enough. So I live for sport, and when you ask people, you ask, do you take care of yourself? People say, yes, I go to the gym, I don't eat bread anymore. But nobody says, well, but once every 2 months I go to the psychologist. I do Sudoku not to lose my memory. Nobody talks about that. So when you ask, do you take care of yourself? Nobody answers with an answer related to mental health. Now things are changing a little, because there's cases like Ricky Rubio, a basketball player, or Valverde, who's a cyclist. Professionals, also athletes, had also had mental problems, because this is also important. It's important for well-known people to raise their voice. Thank you.
That was lovely, Garcia. Thank you. I look forward to testing your beer in due course. And then finally, we have Tenenka Malema, who is a board member at Gamian Europe, who will be speaking to us.
Hello, I'm Tineke Mollema, board member of Gamian. And Gamian aims to be the voice of mental health patients in Europe. It's an umbrella organization for patient organizations around Europe on the mental health side. They do advocacy, raise awareness about mental health disorders, and help with research in those areas. And I'm proud to be here, the voice of bipolar patients today. I have a bipolar disorder. I was 16 when I had my first depression, and it was a very confusing time for me, because I felt so lonely and so low, and I didn't want to do anything. But I was also ashamed, because I felt so, my self-esteem was so low. And in the end, I tried to even commit suicide with my pills. And I was so badly, the care around me was so bad that they said, okay, now we will only give you pills for 2 weeks, so you can't do it again. And in hindsight, I asked for my file, and they said, don't give her any therapy, because her situation is too precarious. But if you are in a precarious position, you should be taken care of. And that was very bad, and I'm still mad about it. Patients who have a mental health disorder need to be taken care of. When I was 19, I had my second depression, and I had to stop nursing school, and that was very hard for me. and I fell in a black hole. I wouldn't go out of bed or shower, or my boyfriend, which I knew from my 18th birthday, really had to push me to take care of myself, and I felt very bad about myself again. And I got therapy, but I didn't feel safe. I felt very insecure, and then I wasn't able to share my thoughts and my feelings about myself and my depression. And they thought that I was not sick enough to be there in the therapy sessions, because there were group sessions, which I got because I was so depressed. And they would bully me and be say nasty things to me because they thought that I was not sick enough to be there. In the end, I felt that I had to get out of that situation and applied for a school to be a social worker. And I was accepted, and then I had my first a hypomanic episode, because I have never been manic, but I have been hypomanic, and that was a really fun time. So bipolar disease can be really depressed, and that's not very nice, but if you're not too manic, then it can be very fun. I spent a lot of money. I went into extreme hairdressers and said, do something fun, and I got a mohawk in orange and pink. I was very active, and I had a lot of self-confidence, and I would go out every Friday, Saturday, and I would meet a lot of new people, and I was like a completely different person. And that's what a little explanation about bipolar disorder. It's like a line from -10 to +10. And when you have -10, you're at the most severe depression. And if you're at +10, you're a most severe manic episode, and you need to be committed often against your will. And that is very bad. But with me, and that's a lot of case with bipolar people with bipolar disorder, is that they have, like with me, I have -7 depressions. My depressions are very severe, but I only go to +3 or +4 in manic, on the manic side. But some people get really manic and sometimes even hear voices. And manic symptoms are overconfident, talking a lot, spending a lot of money and getting into debts, barely sleeping, and magic thinking. And magic thinking is something I also have. And that's very nice, because then you think everything is especially for you. So you would want to cross a street and the light would turn green, and I would think, oh, it turned green because of me. And that's when I want to take my key, take my key for opening the door. I have a lot of keys, and I would pick take the right key in at once. I would think, oh, that must be especially for me. So that's very, you get very confident and you feel very great. But when the hypomanic phase is over, you often get a depressive phase. So in the end, I know that I don't want to do something about the hypomanic phase, because I don't want to get a depression. But I was still not diagnosed with the bipolar disease. After my study, I couldn't get a job. I got another depression, and I went to my GP, and he suggested that I might have bipolar disorder. And I was 26 then, so 10 years after my first depression. And he referred me to a hospital, and then it took 2 weeks to get my diagnosis. So it really is important that with bipolar disorder that you get there soon, get the diagnosis early, and there are projects around machine learning and AI to help diagnose people sooner, and also make risk profiles on people that you know you're on the risk of developing bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or major depressive disorder. And that's really on the cutting edge of research, and I'm really happy about that, because really a lot of people have the same story as me, that having depressions and manic episodes are not seen, so people don't get the diagnosis. But getting the diagnosis wasn't the end for me. I thought it was the end. I thought, now I get a pill and I will be fine. But I kept getting depressions, so every time I got a depression, they had to change my medication and try something new. And in the end, I got rapid cycling. And rapid cycling is that you get very fast changing moods from depressive to manic. And for me, it was during the day. So in the morning, I would be depressed. And in the evening, I would get hypomanic. And that's very bad for your brain. So I had to be committed. And then that was the moment that I really understood, okay, I have bipolar disorder and I need to change my life. Because I just thought getting a pill and I could just pick up my life and live further. But that's not the case. You have to change your life. You have to structure your life. You have to take care of yourself. You have to have a structured and a life where you have a very structured day and a week, and you take care of yourself. And that is what I learned after I got committed to the hospital. And that helped a lot with acceptance and getting a better, higher self-esteem. And I also got active in the bipolar world. I became board member for the Dutch Bipolar Foundation, and I made from my disease my work. And I met a lot of people with bipolar disorder, and also became board member for Gamian. And now, because of my bipolar disorder, I can go to places like this and tell people about bipolar disorder and mental health, and the importance of mental health, and the importance of research on mental health. But I still had the depressions and even suicidal thoughts, but my boyfriend kept me going, and my boyfriend is so important in my life. Finally found the right medication, and now I'm 3 years stable, so I'm very happy. And the important thing with patients is that they have people around them that take care of them, and people who you can speak openly about how you're feeling, and who, when you're feeling bad, help you get up in the morning and get you started. And people who, I had suicidal thoughts, and the only reason I didn't do it was I don't want to do that to my boyfriend. I can't do that to him. So people around you keep you from doing like terrible things to yourself. And that's something I want to really give a message to all people here, is that it's important to support patient organizations, because some people don't have a boyfriend or a family member who can support them, but then you have patient organizations who have support groups, organize activities, and for like-minded people to meet. And then you have your own support network within those patient organizations. So really, the two things are important: research to get early diagnosis, get the right treatment, and support those patient organizations that can be support to the patient who doesn't have a social network. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanika, and thank you all the speakers who have, as I say, assessed their own personal experience. And remember, these are ongoing experiences. And it's funny, I thought I needed to do some summing up comments, but I just looked at all your faces, and you were absolutely engaged with every word that was being said. So I don't need to say any more, and I'm going to hand over to Suzanne for the next session.
Thank you very much. So session 2 is titled Understanding the Brain, from Genes to Circuits to Behaviour and Back. We have 2 short talks. First one is Professor Johan Lerma, and I'll hand straight over to you, Johan.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. En estos 7 minutos,
in those 7 minutes approximately that my talk will take me, I want to show you an example of how the complexity that Dr. Richard Morris was talking about has to be reduced in order to be able to understand problems of mental health or mental disorders. Well, I'm Juan Lerma, you all know me. I work in the Neuroscience Institute in Alicante, a mixed center from the Miguel Hernández University and the Council of Scientific Research, and soon we will be able to carry out our activity in the International Center of Neuroscience in Cajal, as Carlos Closa said, Vice Chairman of the CSIC. I would like to represent here one of what has been talked, the promise of molecular medicine, that it's a cycle in which if we at the human level detect a disease, and we're going to suppose it's a disease that has a genetic origin, and there is a genetic disruption, and discovers what is the gene, well, then one can generate an animal model. We can reproduce that gene mutation or excess of function or defect of function, and we can generate a model of the disease at a simpler level in order to be able to study it. And this facilitates, obviously, to be able to study the pathophysiology of this disease and eventually discover the targets that could be created and that could be modulated with drugs or in such a way that one can develop a therapy that then can be implemented back to the human being. And you obviously know that this requires a lot of basic research, a lot of knowledge of the basis of how the brain works. And this is one of the things that we're going to be insisting upon throughout this day. We need a joint work of basic neuroscience with applied neuroscience, with the clinical setting and the drug development, etc. And you can see here we have been correlating 12,000 genes. Each dot is a gene, and they have represented the amount of the gene expression of those genes in controls in healthy individuals versus individuals with schizophrenia. Everything that is away from the diagonal is more or less expression in controls or on schizophrenic patients. The only intention of this slide is to show that there is an amount of genes that is enormous that have to do with the neuronal communication, the crosstalk with the synapses, something that was referred to by Professor Morris when he talked about the memory and the brain complexity that deviate from that diagonal, that are altered in their expression in the schizophrenic patients. I wanted to tell you about one case that we have developed in the lab based on data that some researchers from North America found a few years ago, in which they found that, you can't see anything, this is too small, but it's the same, in individuals with autism. They did find that there was a duplication in chromosome 11 that led to a duplicity of 16 genes, in which they included one gene that we were working on, that is called Greek 4, codes for a protein and receptor glutamic, glutamate that has to do with synaptic transmission, the excitatory one. The protein at stake is called gluca4. Following the cycle I showed at the beginning, we decided to generate an animal model that reproduced an overexpression of that gene. And there you have as well examples in this slide or this picture. Everything in red tells the expression of the transgene that we had artificially introduced in the mice. The other things mean that the animal is viable, practically normal. It has its typical responses. But if you compare this control of this normal animal with a transgene, you can see that the density in black indicates that there is much more RNA in this case that it codes for that protein. In reality, what we did, and this is a prototypic excitatory synapses with the typical receptors of glutamate, we put more and more receptors in this case. They are called GRICA4 in this case, more receptors of glutamic acid receptors. And as we can verify, they increase the synaptic transmission in the hippocampus, a structure that is typically related with emotions and memory and with some social aspects as well. If we register one single neuron of that hippocampus, you can see here what is the activity, the synaptic activity that can be registered. Each one of these deflections represents the signal induced by a bolus of neurotransmission in a synapsis over the postsynaptic cell. So it's an extremely fine analysis. In the transgenic mouse, the activity is this one. It's clearly different. There is an excess of activity, not only in the amplitude, but also in frequency. The synaptic activity is increased in this transgenic mouse that has an excess of that protein that is called gluca4. How can we ask a mouse if he has a normal social behavior or not? The mice don't speak. So there are tricks like this one, the test, or the 3 chambers. And the only thing that happens is that there are 3 rooms, so to speak, in a cage, and the small mouse can start observing how, and we can observe how it interacts with an empty place, an inanimated object, another one that has a partner, another mouse, and can look if the partner is known or relative or not, or if it's an unknown or new one, and ask how that mouse behaves. When the mice are in these circumstances, both the normal one in gray and the transgenic one in blue, they do recognize perfectly well the object that contains a colleague, a mouse. We can see they interact more with the mouse than with the other object that is no living animal. We have the level of memory, recognition, social behavior that is totally normal. But when a normal mouse, when we put it in front of a mouse that is a relative or familiar to him or a new one, the mouse tend to explore more and interact more with the new mouse, the one they don't know. And this you can see there in the red column compared with the gray one, that is what it interacts with the relative one. If we do this test on the mouse, you can see that it doesn't interact more with the new one than with the familiar one. So there is a social relation problem. But not only that, it's that after experiencing or interacting with the new one, interact with the one that he knows, at the end it goes to the room that has the mouse that is familiar, and it stays in a corner far from the familiar one. I'm here as being protected, but don't bother me. This is quantified, and we can see it better in this other map, color-coded map, where the more Cali, the more time. You can see that it interacts with the familiar one, with the new one, and at the end it goes to the room where the relative is there, but far from it, so that it doesn't bother him. This is clearly behavior that is observed in the autist people. This is autistic people, in such a way that we are generating an animal model of a complicated disease that we can then study in a simpler model. The question is if this is cause or not. And in order to show that, I show this experiment where what we did was to normalize the gene dose of that gene normalized the amount of protein that was expressed in those transgenic mice. And this behavior that the normal mice have and that is altered in the transgenic mice is retrieved in the transgenic mice, indicating that the cause of that behavior is the excess of GlucA4 protein in this transgenic mouse. In order to finish, I remind you this. What it's all about is to show that one single change in a gene that is not mutated, it's a normal gene, but that is expressed more because there are more copies of the gene in those animals or on those humans that do have autism, generates an alteration or a disorder that are not too altered of the synaptic transmission in some places of the nervous system. And this circuit alteration produces a change in the behavior that is reflected as a behavior with a deficiency of social relation. This tells several things. One, that the human diseases can be reproduced. They can be reproduced in experimental animals. This justifies the use of animals in these experiments. And secondly, that probably one can, through this study of the knowledge and the basis, one can be able to reach drugs or therapies that can be used to treat the patients with these diseases. With that, I leave you. I thank you for your attention, and I now give the floor to Rodrigo Quiroga. Rodrigo is a physicist, not biologist, not doctor. This indicates several things. In the field of neurosciences, all the different disciplines have room there. Secondly, he is from Argentina. He studied physics at the University of Buenos Aires, but he has developed his own career, practically all of it in Europe, first in Germany, then in England, and now, fortunately, in Spain, in the IMIM in Barcelona. This means he's a talent that has been retrieved for the Spanish science. And it's fine that we also can take up talent from outside for our science. He's an extraordinary teacher, and he has written several books, 5, 6. One of them is called Borges and the Memory, and I recommend you to read it. And he discovered one fundamental thing in humans, in the human brain, the existence of the concept neurons that do explain how memory is stored and how the concepts are kept in specific neurons. Thank you, Rodrigo. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Juan. Thanks a lot for the invitation to
Thank you, Juan.
Council. Sigo en español.
I will continue in Spanish. Are my slides ready? Well, basically, I'm interested in how memory works in the human brain. You know that the brain has millions of neurons, so my question is how those brain cells allow me to generate and evoke memories. And when I say neurons, I'm referring to individual neurons. You know that with humans we do records such as MRI and things. These things are taken from outside the brain, but to record the activity of brain cells, the only way to do this is to embed electrodes into the brain. This has been done in monkeys, but of course for ethical reasons it has not been done in humans. But in some specific cases those records are performed in humans. This is the case of patients suffering from epilepsy that cannot be controlled by medication. So they're candidates to a procedure called epilepsy surgery. The idea is if we can locate where the epileptic locus is, where the crisis comes from, we may remove the epileptic focus and cure the patient. These surgeries have been very successful in most cases. When they are performed, they are successful in patients with epilepsy, and they are cured with no collateral damage. But in order to perform a surgical resection of the area originating the crisis, you need to know exactly where that area is. In that case, it is justified to place the electrodes, as you can see in the image. And electrodes are 1 millimeter in diameter, and they serve to register the electrical activity, and clinicians try to identify what the focus of the epileptic crisis is. A few decades ago, 20 or 30 years ago, a U.S. hospital started developing a series of electrodes with some villi, and those very thin villi, which are very thinner than a hair, can register the activity of individual brain cells. When I started doing this, I went from Germany to California because of the weather. And also, but this was the only hospital in the world that was capable of recording individual brain cells in humans. A lot of technical details. Well, I'm a physicist, I'm a mathematician, so this this line of research is very interesting because it's highly multidisciplinary. There's a lot of technical details in terms of how the experiments are performed. I'm not going to mention them, but when you use these villi to record the activity of individual brain cells, what you see is Maradona. You don't need to know anything about neuroscience, but you can very clearly see that there is a record, and this is real data. It's a record of one of these electrodes, and clearly, every time you showed a picture of Maradona, the neuron became super activated. And, this is, I'm not, and you may wonder something. And you may say, well, look, this neuron, does it respond to Maradona, or is it responding to that picture of Maradona? Because there's a lot of green, you see the football pitch, or is it the grace of Maradona taking the ball? So there's a specific detail. Perhaps it is a specific detail that the neuron responds to, because we know, for example, that monkeys respond to certain colors. So we said, well, let's show a lot of pictures of the same person and see what the neuron does, whether the neuron is responding to the photo of the person or to the person itself. We did this experiment with a patient whose neuron responded to a picture of Jennifer Aniston. So, and here we showed a lot of pictures of different people, and the neuron responded to a series of different pictures of Jennifer Aniston. And this was precisely when the career of Jennifer Aniston really boomed. Jennifer Aniston in those days was running the last season of Friends, so everybody was talking about Jennifer Aniston. So we said, let's try with pictures of Jennifer Aniston. But the surprising thing about this is that it was very surprising for me, because the patient responded to all the different pictures, and the pictures were very different from each other. And this was never seen in monkeys or other species. This was the first time that this was seen, and it was seen in a human being. So we started doing more interesting things, and we said, look, in this case, I found another neuron that responded to Halle Berry, a very famous actress, a very famous American actress. And Halle Berry in those days was shooting a film called Catwoman. So we showed the picture of Catwoman, and the neuron responded in the same way, even if you couldn't see Halle Berry's face. And we did something even more fun. We said, let's write the names of those people. And you see there on the right, when we wrote Halle Berry, the neuron fired, whereas in other cases it did not. So this is a very abstract representation, the writing. So it's not a picture, it's not a visual stimulus, it's a concept, it's a person. So we kept going, and this was a neuron that responded to me. It responded to my photographs, it responded to my name in writing, Rodrigo, and also verbalized by a computer. So it's multisensory, so you can utter a name, and this is not a visual stimulus, it's an auditory stimulus. So it's different sensory pathways, the vision, audition, so that get together in the hippocampus of humans. And why is this human? And this is a very interesting neuron, much more interesting than Jennifer Aniston's, because the patient didn't know me. So you may say, well, the patient watched 7 seasons of Friends, and after so many years, the neuron fires. It's only normal. But the patient didn't know me. Perhaps he met me the day before I ran this experiment. So these things can be generated quite easily, and this is the way we form memories. We don't repeat our experiences 1 million times before we can remember something. And this is my second favorite one. It's the Luxawalker neuron. I hope you know who Luxawalker is. Many people don't know. It's a character of a saga called Star Wars. And the patient, the neuron, was also fired, not only when we showed them the image of Luke Skywalker, and also when the neuron heard the name pronounced. And the neuron also responded to Yoda. In case you don't know, if you spend too long in the Senate, Yoda is another character of Star Wars, highly associated like Skywalker. It's Jedi, etc. So, the message from all of this is that these neurons do not respond to a single thing. They respond to more than one concept, but when that happens, the concepts are normally associated. It's not just random. And this is very important because if you study memory, the basis of memory is associations. And this is not something I say. Aristotle said it 2,500 centuries ago. So I may have memories with Juan Lerma because I visited with him in Alicante. So Juan Lerma and Alicante are two concepts that I associate, and they are the basis for memories that I have of having been to Alicante when I met Juan. And then I have another memory where I met him in another conference in the Pyrenees. So it's two memories which form the skeleton for other memories of having met Juan or having met Richard Morrison in other conferences. So when we form memories, we tend to generate associations between concepts. And that is the basis, that is the skeleton, the structure, the scaffolding of memory. And we have run different experiments to do with this. And I'll show you a representation of one of our experiments that brought this out very clearly. Imagine that you have a memory that responds to Jennifer Aniston and not to the Eiffel Tower. So you show Jennifer Aniston, the memory, the neuron fires, and you show the Eiffel Tower and the memory, the neuron doesn't fire. But when you show Jennifer Aniston in the Eiffel Tower and the patient generates his memory, the neuron not only responds to Jennifer Aniston now, but it also responds to the Eiffel Tower. And we did this with several couples of photos. So following the neuron's activity, we saw that the neuron forms and codes for new memories. And now, what do these neurons do? Why do we have these types of neurons? Well, because they're in an area which is key for memory. So they represent concepts and not details, because that's the way in which we normally remember. We tend to forget details. This is related to a short story by Borges called Funes al Memorioso. But what we normally do is remember concepts and associations between concepts and forget details. So this is a more technical slide, but I think it's quite easy. We'll see how this happens. Let's imagine there is a group of neurons that respond to Luke Skywalker. And if I record one, there should be others. But how can I generate the association between Luke Skywalker and Yoda? Well, I have another group of neurons that code for Yoda, and some of them will respond to both. It's an overlapped representation. But how do I represent other associations? Well, we have other neurons and from the assembly of the Luke Skywalker group that will also represent Darth Vader, and I will have a Darth Vader assembly. So I have different groups of neurons, grammas, which represent different concepts, and when you overlap representations, you generate associations, which are the key to memory. And I will finish with two additional ideas. This is very different from what has been described in rats, or monkeys, and mice, or other species for over 50 years. It's just the opposite. This is the basis for human memory. This is unique in humans, and in this we're different from other species. And look at this cartoon. If you make records in mice and you generate a representation of this piece of cheese on the chair, the mice will have neurons representing that there is a piece of cheese on the table. But what happens if you move the cheese? Well, everything changes. The neurons firing for the cheese in the corner will not be the same as the neurons firing for the cheese in the center of the room. But this doesn't happen in humans. In humans, it is cheese, regardless of where it is. So if you move the cheese, nothing happens. The Jennifer Aniston neuron, you can do whatever you like, provided that you show Jennifer Aniston, the brain cell will respond. Whether, regardless of whether you change the concept or whatever, the neuron will always respond. So the big difference is that humans, the way we remember is we remember on the basis of concepts. Animals can also understand concepts, but they don't form memories on the basis of associations of concepts. They form memories on the basis of more specific and more detailed associations. And I would say that monkeys are in the middle, but closer to mice than to humans. So what is the message after over 20 years of making these registers, or these recordings? Well, these neurons allow us to think about thoughts, because cheese is a thought. But neurons like those in humans do not exist in animals, because they're the basis of human intelligence, because they allow us to think about concepts. This is what we call metacognition. It's a kind of more elevated alphabet of thought. And let me finish with what Juan was saying. I spent over 20 years in England. I was head of engineering in the University of Leicester. Then I was director of a neuroscience institute. But quoting The Godfather, as a result of this, I came to live near Barcelona. And the building you see there is the Hospital del Mar. And we started doing recordings there. And now we don't use Jennifer Aniston anymore, but we use Penelope Cruz. And the first thing I started doing in California, we are doing exactly the same thing in the Hospital del Mar in Barcelona. And in the next few years, I hope to be able to tell you what we have learned about the memory of people in Barcelona. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank both of the speakers of this session very much. I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that it's time for a very, very short break. The bad news is that we're slightly behind schedule and we need to really push on with the program because of we're also online. And therefore, I would ask people just to take a very short 5-minute break, no time for social interaction, no time for new memory formation, just a very short pause, and we'll convene at past. Thank you. So can I have your attention, please? Welcome back, everyone. Of course, I was a time optimist, but I knew it would probably take just a little bit longer. So we're moving to session 3, and that is the challenge of addressing patients' needs. And Ursman will be also chairing this session. So over to you.
Thanks, Suzanne, and well done, everyone, to get water and caffeine and sugar in good time. But as I say, I could really see how focused people were, but I think we all needed just to stretch our legs. So yes, we now have this third session where we're very focused now to be able to, we grounded it in understanding needs, and we've understood the patient perspective, and now we want to be able to bring those things together to be able to understand how we can bring in the patient perspective into medical research. What we're going to do is we have two short talks, presentations, and then we're going to have a wider panel discussion. I'll introduce the wider panel after we've had the two presentations. So without further ado, I'd just like to ask Dr. Mara Paladena to give her talk on personalised and precision medicine in patients with autism spectrum. Mara.
Buenos días.
Good
on me for this session. I will be presenting in Spanish as we have agreed.
We are going to speak about the precision medicine and personalized medicine applied to autism, the topic of interest in my case. In this setting, briefly of the general audience, we could exchange the personalized medicine, stratified medicine, individualized medicine, precision medicine. I'm not going to go into the details in that terminology, but in a basic and schematic way, we can say that traditional medicine, what it has been based on, is a gold standard to try treatments, as to treatments have to concern with the result of clinical trials, meta-analysis, and so on. The problem with that is that results obtained and on which we base the treatment for the people were results of averages. So for a drug or any intervention was approved as positive for any pathology, we had to see that the average of the results was a positive one. And of course, this didn't capture that some people improved and others not, and some were left the same. Independently of how many were in each group, we could have a positive result or not of the different trials. And without needing to throw away any of this approach, we do have to advance in much more precise medicine, much more intensive, much more that takes more into account the individual variability within the same pathology. We can do that because we have the computational power to do that, to analyze many data collected from many different people, find associations that can't be seen at simple sight, and be able to stratify the samples of patients patients who have a greater similarity at the neurobiological level and that are taking treatments beyond the diagnosis with respect to other individual features. And this would be the precision medicine. After stratifying the samples, we have examples in cancer. It has been the most traditional one. We have a lung cancer or of any other organ, and we have a staging. We have some degrees, and then a series of biomarkers, immune markers, genetic markers, and markers that make us make the decision with respect to the patient, his age, sex, and situation in life, and his preferences to offer or recommend one medication or the other. In the case of depression, well, I believe in the future. I think about the future, how it would be how interesting it could be to have beyond specific diagnosis. Says there's a woman 30 years old with a depression. We are going to see what are the antidepressants that are better, less side effects, etc. Be able instead of that to have a report of this kind of woman, age so and so, with a polygenic risk for this depression, bipolar disorder, and also many other clinical data that allow us to predict that she's going to be admitted several times, high risk of suicide, and bringing together all these clinical, genetic, and molecular data, be able to have a more specific armamentarium for the treatment to give to her. In the case of autism, what do all people have in common, all the people with autism? We could talk about it for a whole week. At the end, these are things that are not easy to see at simple sight, but there is always a difficulty in the social relations, whether it's of friendship or partners or partners in a job. but symmetrical, reciprocal. Sometimes we don't see that. And we have to look very closely at those people who have been pointed out there that have that disconnection from the social world, accompanied by difficulties in communication, social difficulties in flexibility, and series of difficulties in sensorial processing that apart have to be accompanied by dysfunctionality and suffering to really talk about an autistic spectrum disorder. This disorder of the autistic spectrum disorder is terribly heterogeneous. There are many presentations, ways of presenting itself, many intellectual capacity. There are many patients with high intellectual capacity and others not. A great heterogeneity in the clinical picture in many aspects, and also heterogeneity in the causes that lead to have an autistic phenomenon. It's a disorder of the neurodevelopment that affects different levels, but here, the pathophysiological cascade starts in different points of that neurobiological development. At the level of care, because that's how it was in the title, care and research and treatment in Gregorio Marañón Hospital in Madrid a series of years ago, we have implemented in comprehensive medical attention, medical care to try to individualize and personalize the medical care to people with autism as much as possible. We have more than 4,000 people that are taken care systematically, more than 40,000 visits. Well, this is a program that is impregnating the whole hospitals, where we've made some actions of personalized care. We've done a web page, we have videos, we have done different ways of bringing information of people with autism. Some are visual, some more in video. We have tried to personalize what is the medical care, but we are only providing care. We are not providing anything personalized with respect to the medical treatments is concerned. How should we do in order to advance with our European network? Aims to trials, a massive network as to researchers, participants, people with autism, where what we want to have is large databases, where we are having large databases in order to be able to stratify that big heterogeneity of autism and identify molecules that can be rapidly tested in subgroups of patients with specific markers that do that those patients in those subgroups are more homogeneous. This is the stratification that is necessary to advance in precision medicine. But apart from that, we need more. This is a project that, thanks to the initiatives and the funds of strategic project for transformation and economic transformation, the famous PERTE, that the minister has given us. There was a call a couple of years ago, another one this year. Personalised and precision medicine, that is very much in line with other initiatives for stable infrastructures of data science, genomics, in order to be able to advance in this way. In our case, 4 words about this macro project, where 6 autonomous communities of Spain are included, where we are many researchers, and where we want to when we are generating a cohort of 1,000 patients with autism, with a phenotypical and molecular characterization and also genetic one that is very deep, in order to identify fundamentally the general goals, although we are able to identify more homogeneous subgroups of patients where we can test different things according to what these subgroups identify, and also in order to develop algorithms that are cost efficient of etiological diagnosis. In the autism, we take a person with autism at random, and we do the study of the exome. We are going to find 10% of the cause for this person to having autism. If we then say that there is intellectual disability, we reach up to 20-25% of the cause. This was unthinkable of a few years ago, a specific cause with which we can look for specific and concrete treatments. I'm going to present the results, absolutely preliminary. And we are in the midst of this project right now with the first 374 patients, thanks to collaborations that are fundamental, for instance, with the Autism Sequencing Consortium from the United States, or, for instance, Genomics from Santiago, that has a very important genomic power. And we have also identified that of the 374 patients, 72 have some reportable variant. This is the cause of their autism. So we have already an instruction guide for this person that is much more precise. We have selected 8 clinical variables that can be easily collected. outcome measure when they started walking, the age, the things concerning the parents, epilepsy, non-epilepsy. With that information only, it has been, this is something that we've done this year. We have already improved that random of 79% of 374, that we can find a subgroup of 18 patients who meet the clinical characteristics, started walking late but not too late, and with mothers that were not too old. We can already improve the yield, the diagnostic yield in this subgroup to 45%. It's obviously, this is cost efficient for the national health system. We can do tests to everybody, and this is a part of the precision medicine. Another preliminary result with 100 patients, nearly 100 patients, and a lot of information, molecular information concerning immunological data and some clinical data as well, easy. I have this patient, he has something at the level of a pro-inflammatory systemic condition that we believe happens in a subgroup of patients, and not all with autism. And that's those in which we start having to think about testing against some sort of treatment, where here again we identify a cluster of patients with specific features that do have more women than in general the autistic population, that have an age at onset of 1 or 3 years, with severity of autistic symptoms that is important, and that have clear markers of immunological innate activity. This was a pro-inflammatory systemic problem during pregnancy, and of course we have to face and approach that in a very differential manner. In order to conclude, I believe that it is fundamental to do the deep characterization, clinical, metabolic, biochemical, in very large amounts of patients. I think that we believe policies, we need policies that help us to translate all those discoveries in specific health actions that facilitate to share data in safe platforms. And we also need to improve and accelerate ethical mechanisms in order to be able to do all this and put it into practice, bear in mind all the considerations, the data protections, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Paraleda, for a very, very interesting presentation. And we're going to move on swiftly to Professor Jose Obeso, who is the director of the Neurosciences Center, CSIC.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, buenos días. So
everybody understands that neurological conditions are very dire, disabling, and result in a significant social cost and a significant emotional impact. Specifically, neurodegenerative conditions, Parkinson's disease, memory disorders, Alzheimer's disease, dementia, are an epidemic of the 21st century, and therefore we need to tackle the problem and take the bull by the horns and interfere with the level of disability and with the difficulties experienced by patients in their daily lives and in their relationships with others. An important point about neurological conditions and neurodegenerative conditions is that there is a gap, a huge gap in time between the moment somebody starts the process with the onset of symptoms, the loss of synapses, etc., and the time the person goes to a specialist. Yesterday, somebody was saying that in the Boston area, where there are more neurologists, and in the whole of the UK, a person with a memory disorder takes between 8 to 10 months to go to their first neurological appointment. So this is huge. They have wasted almost a year. So this is a very big practical problem, and therefore this is something that needs to be changed. There is a need, a huge need, because to reduce disability of these patients, there should be programs, like Dr. Perriada was saying, for early detection and early treatment of these patients. I was asked to talk about technology, but I'm a neuroscientist and a clinician. I am not a technologist. Therefore, I am going to make an effort to summarize the most significant technological development, considering that technological development in general has an impact on disability by the improvement of symptoms, but technology is not going to affect the disease process of the patient. So deep down, this is not what one would like, right? Because what one would like is for technology to act on the intimate process of the disease. Now, in terms of technology, we should first of all mention the brain-computing interface, whereby the electrode multi-array is placed in the brain cortex, trying to achieve a simple result, right? Trying to affect the motor area. For example, people with palsy, but with functioning neurons, the idea is to train them to generate the neuronal activity that codes for movement, and an interface is built with a robotic arm, like the one you see on the screen, and so the person learns to give orders to the robot to get the neurons to move in the brain. In practice, this is very good because, look at this gentleman, all that he has achieved thanks to this system. This is a person with palsy that has recovered a certain degree of motion, which is, no small feat. Another important thing is verbal language and emotions. These are two articles published in Nature very recently. This is a multi-electrode array that codes for neuronal activity related to language. Here, unfortunately, we can't hear the sound, but this lady is telling the avatar something. The avatar is speaking for her. The husband says, "I'm going to go shopping." And she says, "When are you going to come back?" And he says, "An hour." And the avatar laughs and says, "Impossible, you can't take an hour." So all of this communication is achieved through codification of the activity of the cortex and the interface with the external system. So in practice, a lot has been done. And this is huge because it's like when it's like going back, right? It's like, achieving things ex post, and this is really huge, a huge breakthrough. And this is another example of spinal procedures in Parkinson's disease. This is a Parkinson's disease model in monkeys that showed that in animals with Parkinson's, stimulation of the spinal cord achieved a huge benefit in animals. This is not evident because the physiopathology of mobility disorders is not in the spinal cord. It's more in the brain, in the loss of dopamine, etc. But this video shows a gentleman with Parkinson's disease and significant gait disorder, and you see how he walks when he has the stimulators activated. This is anecdotal, but the thing is that this gentleman who walked very poorly now can walk much better, and the same thing happens in apes, in monkeys. So there's basic research, there's basic science supporting all of this. And now I will move to what we do at the center we run in Móstoles, close to Madrid, where our main endeavor is to stop the progression of Parkinson's disease. And since we are here to talk about technology, I will speak about focused ultrasound. The advantage is that here there's no surgery required, there's no incision, there's no blood, it's not gory. So you work from the external side. and there's 1.2 thousand ultrasound beams that produce hyperthermia and produce an ablation. For example, ablations are used in the atrium of the heart to get rid of arrhythmia. So you shouldn't be that negative about ablations. And this is a clear example of a lady. This is a spectacular case. She has tremor, as you can see here. We are treating her in the MRI device, and here you have a clear comparison that shows you the result achieved before and after treatment. So, in 2.5 hours inside the resonator, she managed to recover mobility control, which is not bad. But Parkinson's disease is more complex than tremor. There's hyperactivity, glutamatergic hyperactivity, and the subthalamic nucleus plays a very important role. So we decided to impact the subthalamic nucleus, and here you see an image of this impact, and this is a coronal section of the brain. Here you see this is a treated site, and here this was our first patient, the gentleman. We performed this treatment on him. He's a young man. He was limited to the right side, and our purpose is to get his right side to be as functional as the left side. This is before treatment. The video, I mean, I am in the video, and as you can see, I was younger back then, but I didn't shoot this video just to blow my own trumpet and show you my good looks when I was young. I'm just showing you the patient. So, in a relatively short period of time, we managed to resolve this patient's situation. We carried out a double-blind study compared with placebo, and which showed great efficiency. All patients improved, and this has led us to use this in patients who have been with the disease for less than 5 years, with the idea that if we treat them early, we may restore part of the physiopathological alterations of Parkinson's and improve the at least medium-term prognosis of these patients, 5 to 10 years. If we achieve that, it would be wonderful. And if we achieve this, for example, with Alzheimer's disease, the impact would be huge. So you can see that this lady has improved significantly. This is a young lady. She's a lawyer, and she went back to normal life with little medication. And the next step will be to find evidence for this. Now, lastly, I want to speak about the opening, the BBB opening. Things happen in the brain, of course, but sometimes, for example, the hippocampus in Alzheimer's disease, in Parkinson's disease, the corticospinal pathway. So there's some studies of BBB opening to apply therapeutic agencies in a very targeted manner. We performed some studies in Parkinson's disease, in Alzheimer's disease. Even the uptake of amyloid goes down quite a bit in these trials. And now I would like to give you an example of the blood-brain barrier opening. This is the amyloid plate. This is a tau aggregate, and the barrier becomes an obstacle for drugs, or a gene vector, for example. It prevents these drugs from reaching the brain parenchyma. So bubbles are injected into the veins, they reach the brain, and they result in an opening of the BBB. And so now the drugs can pass freely. So we've treated 12 patients with Parkinson's disease. This is in the area, the putamen, where most dopamine is lost, so you can open up this wall and break it down or pull it down and nothing happens. And then, so the putamen barrier breaks down, and this is a PET that needs to penetrate into the parenchyma, and you can see that it has penetrated the area. And so this BBB, so the barrier opens, and the result is very successful. So this technique, which has been used by different scholars, even in Japan, has shown that a gene vector can cross this area, and the neurons can be transfected. Of course, this has to be significantly improved to have therapeutical value, but it is a good beginning. This is the first time that this has been shown in the literature. So all of these technological improvements make it possible to improve patients' quality of life, and these are all revolutionary concepts in many aspects, but they don't allow us to really penetrate the intimate mechanisms of the disease. I think we should move towards a characterization of each specific disease into subtypes, and we should try and achieve early detection and treat these diseases as specifically as possible, as it's happening in the cancer area. Neurodegenerative diseases should follow what is happening in the cancer.
Thank you, Professor Obeso. That's been, again, a very, very interesting presentation, which, again, shows us the richness of neurological research. And now what we're going to do is we're going to, with our two speakers, are going to be joined by 3 additional panelists to be able to extend the discussion out to look in particular at how patients can be a central part of the research process. And our speakers will be Professor Giancarlo Cormi, who is President of the European Charcot Foundation and is also Chair of the Prada Human Brain Project. And then Dr. Paola Zartin, who is a Scientific Committee Co-Chair of the PROMPT Initiative, as well as being Director of Research at the Italian MS Society. And then Stephanie Hoffman, who is Head and General Manager at Amylyx Pharmaceuticals. So you're almost welcome, and apologies to the 3 of you that we're now in a slightly condensed timeline. But what we wanted to do was just starting Professor Cormi to start off, but each of you, just in 2 minutes, if you can, to capture from your own perspectives the value of patient engagement in clinical research and other research.
Thank you very much, Usman, and many thanks for the invitation to be here to try to really bring the attention to the extreme relevance of neurodegenerative disorders, and particularly I'm interested in the area of multiple sclerosis. Let me start saying that among the different chronic neurological disorders, MS is the one where we had the major advancement in terms of treatment. And as we heard in the previous session, now the person with MS may expect to have a normal life, which is really what we would like to see always. Unfortunately, this is not achieved for everybody. Still, we have some relevant problems. So we had spectacular advances thanks to the molecular medicine, but still it remains fundamental, the contribution of the person with the disease. And the reason is that there are a lot of hidden symptoms in the disease, for example, fatigue, emotional, cognitive problems, pain, and only with the contribution of the patient expertise, the voice of the person with the MS, we may be able really to pick up the evolution of the disease and then take the appropriate interventions. Of course, it is fundamental that the contribution is scientifically strong and valid, and that's really one of the major challenges that we are facing with an initiative that is called PROMS, that is a joint initiative of the European Charcot Foundation and of the International Federation of MS.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Comey, just for taking us forward, setting us up. I'm going to hand over straight to Dr. Zarantoon. Paula.
So thank you very much for this invitation and to discuss with such a distinguished audience how we can make patient perspective scientifically meaningful on brain research, from basic research to clinic, I would like to say. And my own background belonged to international neuroscience research. So I had the opportunity to face the challenge of maximize the impact of patient engagement from different perspectives. And I do believe that the time is right to give a content of validity to a new concept of value of humanism from research to care. And the reason why I'm saying this is based on insight I got from a responsible research innovation project named Multi-Act, focused on multi-stakeholder participatory governance of patient engagement that Italian MS Society coordinated with important partners and developed with important partners such as European Brain Council. And from my experience in international global patient-reported outcome for multiple sclerosis initiative. And in the world of European Commission, many factors call for this increased patient engagement. So we heard this morning, we need to develop predictive, preventive, and personalized medicine. There is digital technologies that can be the method at the service of this paradigm shift, but we need to engage patients to enable this paradigm shift. And last but not least, the creation of European health data space will offer important opportunity to improve brain policy and research, but only if we will be able to engage patient, we will fast-track us towards effective circulation of data across Europe, and they will be vital stakeholder to enable the balance between individual rights of data policy and scientific innovation. So the time is right. We have model to achieve this. What began as an extension of patient advocacy is now need to evolve on science of patient input, and the multi-act projects and the PROMS initiative can offer important case study for all neurodegenerative diseases to achieve this goal.
Thank you, Paula. Again, getting that really clear and immediate need. And also, I think the way that you've also set out that the structures are there. We've got things in place. So, Stephanie Hoffman, Stephanie, just over to you from the perspective from the pharmaceutical industry.
Thank you, Osman, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to share our perspective on such an important topic. And indeed, at Amylyx, we're really true believers in the value of patient perspective involved from A to Z in drug development pathway and beyond. If I can just state what is the value. First of all, before starting any research project, I think there is high value in understanding the needs of the patients, understanding their expectations. For example, a decade ago, when our co-founders and co-CEOs wanted to start a clinical trial in ALS, they just thought, okay, we're going to just start a trial and ensure that the drug can prolong survival, and that would be good for the community. And then when they talked to the community, they realized that due to this fatality and the brutalness of this disease, living long is not necessarily what the patients wish only. Some even want to just, stop prematurely this life. So what they've learned is that what matters is an improved quality of life and improved functionality on top of improved survival. So very important since day one to understand that. Also, if you think about recruitment of trials, specifically for rare brain disease, very important to work and collaborate with the patient community to recruit the trials rapidly. If you think a little bit further down the drug development pathway and think about successful clinical research leading to solutions, innovations, accessible to patients, you need to make sure that the patient perspective is well exposed to the regulators who will have to actually assess and interpret the results of trials and understand, what is the right benefit ratio, benefit-risk ratio level that should be put to assess the drug. And also, if you think even further down the line, making sure that the patient perspective is understood by the payers who needs to assess the values of therapies the right way, to just put the right price and reimbursement pathways. And maybe the last point, which is, I think, very important too, specifically in life-threatening condition like many brain disease, early access pathways, very difficult to design and implement, very crucial to have the patient perspective, and work together with the community to implement those programs that are linked with a lot of ethical sensitivity topics. So with that, I will hand it over back to Osman.
Thanks, Stephanie. We've got that picture. What I want to pick up with next, and actually, Stephanie, I'm going to come back to you and then come down the panel to be able to say we've got the case for change. We understand what good looks like in terms of patient engagement, and we can also see the rationale for it. Can you tell us, and I know there are a number of them, but what are the barriers particularly strikes you as being of significance?
So that's been a nice mechanism put in place to ensure the patient perspective is actually shared with decision-making bodies throughout drug development pathway, not necessarily in all countries, unfortunately. And what we are hearing is also that even though the patient's voice is at the table, it's not necessarily taken into consideration in the final decision-making. For example, in life-threatening condition, what are the risk level that the patient are ready to take? It's not necessarily always taken into consideration when authorities are, assessing benefit risk. And this caused some frustrations. So I think that that's one of the key points. And another one is the fact that with complex disease like brain disease, often the issue is that decision-making bodies have to make decisions without totally understanding the complexity of the disease. And of course, they need academics and medical experts, but they would also need patient experts to make sure that they can do their job well and assess well the innovations in development.
And I think as you pick that up, being able to say that it's not simple, also that there is a risk of tokenism, and that, when you were saying about NICE, I certainly heard that, where there is effective practice, we're not seeing that universally applied. So thank you, Steph, you managed to really get those through. Paola, what's your sense then? You have a lot of experience of the central barriers.
Well, I think that we need to invest not only on what we are going to prioritize in the agenda of our European brain agenda in terms of research area, but we need to invest on how. And I have to recognize that several important European brain initiatives include of help to framing the responsible research innovation into their agenda. But I think that we need attention and resources to make sure that we will enable institutional changes to ensure scientific approach to patient engagement. And again, we already start to develop models, so for us it's important to be help to the institution to uptake such a kind of model. Of course, one of the main resistors in terms of stochastic approach is that we cannot rely on few expert patients. It's time to get rid of relying on few expert patients, but be able to engage a broader community. This will help us to also fulfill principle of equity, inclusion, and diversity that is at the core not of patient engagement, not of advocacy approach, but of science to really achieve relevance results. So this is where we should focus, and in terms of practical project, I think it's time to develop also in the frame of European brain health data space, to develop database that will be able to integrate patient-reported outcome data with the other outcome, clinical, genetics, that will allow us to really barcode our brain disorders and predict and prevent disease, because this is at the root of brain health approach, and I think it's time to promote this paradigm shift.
I think it is, and I'm particularly struck when you're saying not just tokenistic, but potentially just limited involvement, and it needs to be broad-ranging. When you were talking about that wider diversity of the patient voice out there, and again, connecting in to be able to say, look, the things are out there to be able to use if we're willing to use them. Professor Comey, Giancarlo, again, what's striking you, and I think maybe if you've seen in identifying barriers, do you think those barriers have got higher over time or lower?
Well, if we think about which is the process of development of new treatments, not only in MS, always in all the diseases, unfortunately, the contribution of patients has been very minor. And the main barrier was that there was not really confidence with the use of the patient voice. The patient-reported outcome very, very occasionally has been used in the assessment of phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials, which is really one of the major problems we have today. But also in the post-approval process, in registries, the use of this type of contribution has been really marginal at the best. So, I mean, here is really where we need really to change. And again, as Paula said, in order to achieve such a value for the patient voice, it is fundamental to qualify the voices. It's fundamental, the process, of course, in combination with health authorities to validate the patient-reported outcome. Here is a tremendous evolution. For example, in the use of so-called passive outcomes, passive patient-reported outcomes using wearable devices. I mean, one of the major problems when we have to evaluate a person with a disease is that we have to explore the condition with the classical neurological tests enriched by some specific type of tests, which are always performed in the aseptic condition of a visit at the hospital. So in some way, we pretend to pick up the condition of a person looking for 15 minutes as a representation of the previous 6 months. This is really a bit wrong, let me say. So we should try to go much more close to the real condition of the person. And one possible approach could be, for example, the validation of these type of digital medicine possibilities we have today, much more close to the reality.
Thank you, and I think that we can see how you can, when you were talking about the wearables and the technology, to understand that we've got to be able to get that fullness of the voice, that fullness. I'm going to go over Professor Abiso. You were just presenting. You're with the centre, with CSIC. You're very much in this space. So again, give us a sense of what you're seeing of barriers, and maybe also how you're overcoming them, just in a minute.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, well, of course, there is a major difficulty here, which is to foster research, which is very simple, which is money. If there is no budget, one cannot speed up the process of research. But beyond that, what I find is a major difficulty in moving quickly from the experimental basis to the clinics, because the administrative barriers are major. Also because a large number of our potential therapies, particularly when acting against neurodegeneration on a very basic, trying to really attack the principles of disease. Most of the agents are within the framework of the pharma. And pharma is not very willing to share the risk taking in research. The pharma only move in, and many times move in even absurdly, even without real high evidence, just for other reasons. So I find that we would need much stronger facilitation from the administration, and somehow to be able to, twist the pharma to be a little bit more open to clinical research. Not the one they do, which is clinical trials. This is something else.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Abeso. As we come back down, that might be something that Stephanie will also pick up on. And then, Dr. Parelida, if I can also ask you, again, the same question of what are you seeing as being current sort of obstacles, barriers to patient engagement within your field?
Yeah, thank you very much. I wanted to share a couple of experiences. One is in the service provision, and that's much easier. And in our own experience, after 10 years of federations, of associations advocating for medical care services, we got one, and it has been a perfect partnership. We conduct yearly health and autism meetings, and it's really useful. In terms of research, there are some more difficulties. We've been working also with autistic representatives in these European networks for clinical trials in autism, and we have had these participants collaborating in all parts of the research, from concept to selection of molecules to selection of outcomes, to read and review all documents for families. But this has been really fruitful, I would say, but also it poses some big challenges, maybe specific to the field of autism and other fields with a lot of intellectual disability, or intellectual loss, I don't know, maybe Alzheimer's or that. And one of the main challenges is really to appoint the voices that really represent the great diversity and heterogeneity of needs and perspectives of patients. So is it better voice or representative a person with autism with a high functioning, or is it an autistic kid carer or parent? That, I think, can lead to some confrontation, which I really think we need to work on. and try to avoid. Sometimes it's also the terminology, and also in this area where I work in, we have currents, very, very useful as neurodiversity, but sometimes you see that that can shadow the needs of very disabled people. So to coming into terms that are acceptable, not losing the complexity of the needs and the severity of some situations, I think is also to try and find terminology that is useful for all, not offensive, but that doesn't simplify reality too much. Those, I would say, are two, and also what was Paola pointing, to try to find the appropriate balance between the patient specific and present needs and the scientific advance and innovation. I would say those are the three main challenges. Thank you.
Fantastic. Really, the richness that we've managed to get to in just a short space of time, and just giving that example of autism to understand the real need, but also what it needs to be really thought through to make sure that patient engagement is as meaningful as it needs to be. What I'm going to now do, just to be able to sort of draw us to a close, is to be able to, I'll start with you, Mara, just to be able to say, we're hosting this because we have the upcoming Spanish Presidency of the EU. So we can have our hypothetical policy audience out there. So if I can give you a sort of magic wand to make one policy wish or demand out there, what would it be?
That's really difficult. Ask for an inclusion, a very complex inclusion and engagement of participants that includes validation, but also qualifying, as it was said before, who represents best what, and where the voices are most appropriate, and where the scientific knowledge is the one, and to try to enrich and not confront the dialogue between both. And again, in the field of autism, there are many patients that are scientists, many patients that are carers or doctors. We have to enrich our perspectives.
Fantastic, and that real sort of sense of open engagement. Excellent, it's working. Professor Abiso, Jose, again, same thing. You've got your one policy ask.
Mine? Human research. That's it.
Short, sweet, and very meaningful. Thank you for that. And Giancarlo.
I think that there is something unique in neurological and psychiatric disorder that is really due to the complexity of the brain compared to any other organ. We have to be able to bring this message. From one side, our brain is really the essence of a human being. So this is really unique, and because of the complexity, all the problems, methodological problems, are really multiplied by 100. So we have to transfer this concept because this is really unique to our brain diseases.
Unique challenge and a unique opportunity. Paola.
Yeah, so the future of medicine is multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. So we need more guidelines from European Commission and in our future European brain research agenda to understand how to strengthen the skill of the science of with and of patient input, means engaging patient in responsible research, innovation approach, and use this engagement to translate patient perspective into scientific, meaningful outcome. So the time is right, and I hope that we will have these guidelines and this recommendation.
I'm sorry, I need to cut in here. We're getting short of time, but I just thank you, Usman, for moderating this session. For all our panelists, I'm sorry we didn't get the final word from everybody, but it's been a super session. We've got lots of food for thought and ideas on how to move forward. Thank you very much. And I invite the next panel to come up to the platform. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So session 4 is going to be addressing brain challenges at the EU level, and our moderator is Frederick Destrebach, and he's the Executive Director of the European Brain Council. Fred.
Thank you very much, Professor Dixon. Whilst we are now putting everything in place for the start of this panel, I actually would like to thank the previous panelists, because we received the perfect launchpad in actually starting this session on addressing challenges at the EU level, but also having a discussion that is policy focused. And I'd like to invite our panelists to build on, let's say, this magic wand moment that we just had. So we will have on this panel Professor Dixon, Professor Mara Dirsen, Professor José Luis Lanciego. We'll have also Cristina Maragall, as well as Dr. Francisco Colomer. So I simply would like to start with you, Suzanne, if I may, because you said in your introduction this morning that we needed to live up to the promise to citizens and society and to unleash the full potential of the community. And I know you'll be concluding later on, but if you could give us like a very short perception of how you feel after having heard all these presentations so far.
Oh, thank you, Fred. I maybe just wanted to make 2 short points in response to this question. I come back to the point that brain research needs to become an EU priority. What we need is really a brain health and disease action plan involving a wide range of stakeholders, many of whom you've heard from today. And the idea is that this panel would give some visibility to brain research and help to increase research support that's at least similar to other prioritized research areas in the EU, such as cancer. At the European Brain Council, we're working hard towards this goal, and we have EU-funded coordination and support action, which is called Towards Structuring Brain Health Research in Europe. And this aims to pave the way towards a future partnership in brain health. And if we're successful, this would have a real capacity to reduce fragmentation of brain research in Europe and engage a wide range of stakeholders, building on existing projects such as eBrains and, of course, the Human Brain Project. My second point is I'm a basic researcher. I work in animal models trying to understand disease mechanism. For those of us that are working on brain research, it's rather obvious that if we're going to reduce the burden of brain disease, we need evidence-based prevention and intervention treatment strategies. So how are we going to generate this evidence base? There continues to be important breakthroughs. We've heard many today for many diseases, but for many, we still know almost nothing about the underlying neurobiology. If we go one stage further, we would say, and as we've heard today, we know simply very little about how the brain functions in certain aspects. We've learned a lot, but there's still a lot of open questions. So this is our strategy, and we need commitment and support from the EU. And this is why we don't, I don't agree or understand statements that were made in the European Parliament during the hearing of the recent Citizens' Initiative, indicating that we could already replace animals in research by the so-called alternative methods. No one's saying these methods that have value, but I would rather rebrand them and call them complementary methods, because we can't replace animals in research currently. We can't study behaviour in silico or in the Petri dish. They can produce useful insights, of course. So I would like to ask the Commission to support and value the essential role of animal research. And at EBC, we're very actively engaged in this process, explaining to MEPs the issue. And we currently are going, this week I think we're publishing an article in the parliamentary magazine that's aimed to target the MEPs. So these would be my 2 points. And of course, clinical research backing, we have to work together. We need to include the patients. It's one big picture involving all stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, and I'm sure we can pick up on some of these points later on. I'd like now to turn to you, Mara. You're coming here as president of the Spanish Brain Council. We heard this morning from Carlos Closa about all the efforts that is being made in Spain on the capacity building and the investments, but also to that conclusion of more still needs to be done. So what is your perspective from on this statement?
Me paso al castellano. Creo que ha quedado clarísimo.
I think it is very clear,
Esta mañana.
it has been made clear how important research into neuroscience is. We've heard the figures, we've heard the costs, and we've heard only about the direct costs, but we haven't heard that brain conditions sometimes, most of them are chronic diseases, and the health system is only concerned with acute conditions. So for chronic conditions, we need more knowledge about the evolution of these conditions. And we've also heard from neurodegenerative conditions, but we haven't heard much about child disorders. Children with autism we have heard of, but there's people who start with the disease very early on in their lives, and those people are going to have to live with their disease for many, many years. So all of these challenges are also accompanied by social change, because our society is aging rapidly, so more and more brain health is going to gain more and more importance. We're all going to be much more aware that we need to reach our old age with conserved cognition. Not only that, but in addition, we need to take into account that people with cancer, diabetes, are going to also have brain disease. They are also going to have mental disease produced by that comorbidity or, in parallel with it. So this is going to be a global phenomenon. It is a global phenomenon. So the question is not what we're going to do. The question is why it hasn't been done already, why the money hasn't been invested already. I think it's all very clear. Why? Well, in my view, there's several reasons. First of all, people keep saying, the brain is too complex and brain diseases are so multifactorial. Well, at present, we've heard evidence from our speakers. We already have tools. We already have tools and ways of studying the brain that are allowing us to take giant steps forward. We already have tangible results, diagnostic advances, therapeutic advances. We've seen it. We've seen it. So it is very important for us to understand that all of those advances have occurred because there are researchers and neuroscientists who, starting with basic research, have provided knowledge which then clinicians can apply. And Europe should not lose this opportunity of capitalizing on all of those efforts. And we should also think that all of that has resulted in a body of knowledge that we now need to apply and we need to overcome the barriers that we still have, because otherwise we will not be capable of succeeding. So I am very happy that we have started, creating a European agenda, but the agenda needs to be backed with investment, because otherwise we won't be able to do anything. It will just be good words, good intentions, but behind that there has to be financial support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mara. That was a very strong plea, and I think that the applause also demonstrates the like-mindedness within this room. We indeed address the issue of complexity, but also the issue of delivery of biology and delivery of science, and the need to do more. And we are really at this turning point now of making sure we have this policy momentum for greater prioritization in the context of this EU agenda. José Luis, I'd like to turn to you on the basis of what was just mentioned by Mara, and also for this need of greater facilitation of the emergence of solutions in the brain space. You're here in your capacity of president of the Pan-European Committee of the International Brain Research Organization, but also as a newly nominated board member of EBC. So congratulations for that, but would like to have your say in this discussion too. Thank you.
Thanks, Alfred. Thanks, Alfred. Good morning, everyone. Muchas gracias, Fred.
Thank you very much, and good morning. Good afternoon already, all the attendants. This has been a very comprehensive morning. I hope that you are enjoying as much as I am doing it. In my quality of president in Europe, I want to congratulate the EBC, the European Brain Council, and its staff for having organized all this, and the Senate for hosting us. And the Neuroscience Association, the oldest one, IBO, is founded in the 60s, and U23 is distributed in the 5 continents. We are a global association. We have a series of values that are inclusion, diversity, gender balance, and geographic balance in our geographic area. And we bet for facilitating life and training the new generations of neuroscientists that are coming after us. Practically all the money of IBRO is going to go to the new generation of scientists, even some at the level of not yet graduated students. Here in the room, we have a representation of a Corpus Curiosum entity that is an initiative made by students and for students that have a funding from this euro. And we have to bet for people who come after us. I hope to retire as soon as possible. That's why I would like to. And also speak in favor, as echo what Suzanne, our president, said, for the need of animal experimentation. This is something fundamental, and we had to go to the European Parliament and counteract the initiative funded by PETA in Germany, and all the organizations, because this is experiments are absolutely necessary in counseling. Not only work with animals, but also be able to obtain better animal models for the diseases that we're working with, in order to increase the possibilities of having new treatments that will be working when they follow the clinical trials. I can't imagine, and I have enjoyed it a lot, but I don't imagine in vitro neuron respondent to the face of Jennifer Aniston. I think it would be not too predictable. And finally, they have spoken about funding. Of course, we need more money. We all need money, much more money, but not only public money. We also need to attract private funding for research setting from the industry and from different foundations, not because Cristina is near me here, Maragall, but the Maragall Foundation, La Caixa Foundation, Tatiana Foundation. These are examples of private funding that are reaching the neurosciences in Spain. And our politicians have the obligation of making life easier for those foundations so that they can have more private money to research. I work in a private center. I was trained in a public center. And at the end of the day, equally good are both things. At the end, we need a greater public investment, of course, but I think that what really is going to set the difference is when there is a private investment for research in neurosciences. And practically, this is what I wanted to tell you.
Thank you very much, José Luis. And actually, thank you also for almost making my role obsolete, because you're making the perfect transition to bring our next panelist to the floor. So, Cristina, you're representing here the Pascal Maragall Foundation. And obviously, all the previous presentations were making like a strong case on the link, not only from basic neuroscience, but also the impact to society. I'm pretty certain that's one of the points on which you'd like to provide us with some insight. Over to you.
Thank you, Frederick. Buenos días, profesora Susan Dickinson, investigadores, asistentes, ponentes. Thank you very much for inviting me to this session. Yo no soy científica.
I'm not a scientist, I'm not a patient, but I'm the caregiver of a person with Alzheimer. This gives me certain authority. I consider this day an excellent opportunity to acquire and share knowledge from the very different angles that can be enriched by it. I introduce myself briefly. Since 2012, I'm the president of the Pascual Maragall Foundation that was created in 2008 by my father after his diagnosis of Alzheimer. After a whole life dedicated to active politics, he decided to drive the creation of a foundation promoted to the thrust on scientific research of the disease. This was his last political event, the one today as well, and I'm certain that he would be very happy of being here with us today. In 2012, the foundation started its research center, the Barcelona Research Center, from where there are projects of research for prevention and early detection of Alzheimer's disease. For that, we count on the platform of neuroimaging that are exclusively dedicated to the brain with in the lab of infant studies and a cohort of more than 2,700 healthy people. As we have seen in the different and previous interventions, there is a great collective effort in order to understand the complex mechanisms that do affect our brain. We are facing a scientific challenge that is enormous, that we have to face, as has been said, from the present with the vision of the future and a coordinated fashion from the different aspects that do affect the brain health. The progress in science and technology, together with the improvement of the public health services and the adopting more healthy lifestyles, have moved some challenges to older ages. Some diseases that normally were unsurmountable now have become chronic diseases. This scenario presents with an important exception. In the case of Alzheimer and dementias, at present are affecting 1 out of 10 people over the age of 65. We still don't have treatments that can stop the onset or put a stop on the development of the dementias. If we want to guarantee healthy aging and aging for our citizens, it's urgent that Alzheimer and the dementias are incorporated in the political agenda. If I have time, I'm going to give you some data from the European Commission. The prevalence of dementia in the Union was increased from 5.9 million people with dementia in 2000 to 9.1 million in 2018. This is more than 50% increase in less than 20 years. It's estimated that this figure will be doubled in 2050. Out of those cases, 60–70% are due to Alzheimer's disease. The Professors José Obeso and Richard Morris have told us that at the beginning of this session as well. Alzheimer's starts 15–20 years before the diagnosis comes. Some projections say that if in 2025 we found a treatment to delay 5 years the disease, the onset of the symptoms, 2030, the figure of affected people would be reduced by 40% and the cost by 33% as well. In view of those relevant data, we should say that preventing its onset and be able to obtain treatments that delay the development, it's an emergency that can't be delayed for the European Union. The good news in front of this reality is that Europe and its member states do have solid networks of research, scientific research, in order to face that enormous challenge. In report that we have recently published that analyzes the scientific production between 2017 and 2021. This is the scientific production in dementias and Alzheimer. They show some relevant data that I would like to share with you here today. 80% of the bibliographic production in the world in Alzheimer and dementia is concentrated in 14 countries. 7 of them are European states. United Kingdom, Germany, Italy, Spain, Holland, France, and Sweden occupy positions that are relevant. And out of the 48,000 publications that have been analyzed, Europe is author of 40% of those publications. Even so, the neurodegenerative diseases and mental diseases, as has been said, need more funding for the research and treatment and the health treatment due to its enormous prevalence and the enormous cost caused on the health systems. The social services, that is another, and especially the families of the affected people in Spain. We estimate a average cost of the care in 30,000 euros per year and 70 hours per week. To keep on advancing and materialize all those different wills, we should have a comprehensive strategy that goes beyond the borders of the nations, together with coordination plans that are specific, that are promoting exchange of knowledge and good practices among the member states of the European Union. This includes as well, as we've said, and Tini said that, and Asian as well, Rosa Montero has said that as well, policies of diffusion and social education in order to better understand those diseases, to break the barriers of the stigma so that one can keep on advancing. And also in a joint fashion, we have to drive our requests to the different public administrations in the different countries in order to keep on going and advancing in the progression of that brain health and in research and treatment of the pathologies involving the brain. Science has always responded with solutions to the challenges that have been put forward, always when there has been investment in order to, in turn, the research has been the driving change of social change and economic change in a world that is more driven by innovation. So we are now in a crucial moment in research and treatment about Alzheimer's. We have seen that in this field, recent scientific advances do place us in front of a new paradigm of the clinical approach of this disease. We are going to be able to count on drugs that can modify the course of the disease. And what will happen in the next years will be absolutely relevant. The current moment is a critical one to make in the present the solutions for the future. We have to make a call to action. Mara did that to all the different actors that take part in this collective challenge that will allow to better know our brain and find answers and responses to the different conditions and pathologies that are threatening it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christina. And actually, yes, as a carer, you have full authority to speak in that way. And thank you for making such a strong appeal. And that allows me to turn to our last panelist on this session. So Dr. Francisco Colomer San Martin from the Ministry of Science and Innovation. Francisco, I'm really sorry, but we have really loaded the boat of expectations on your side. We have extended the wish list right before Christmas. We know that it's coming on your desk with not only very complex matters to solve, a huge societal challenge, but also there is light at the end of the tunnel. And we'd like to hear from you what can be done from your perspective and how the community that you've got in front of you can be helped, and actually how can they help you. So, Francisco, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon. Well, I have to clarify that I'm a doctor in astrophysics, and this places me in a situation of inferiority among all the different experts that are gathered here today. But it is nevertheless true that, as happens to astrophysics, I've been very motivated with the first image that Dr. Richard Morris showed, those images that surprise us, that we are able already to start understanding, because it's similar to what happens to us when we study the universe. It's also a surprising manner of knowing up to where our knowledge may reach. At this respect, I also have some empathy with Rosa Montero, and here's her cosmonaut, when she explained the feeling of loneliness, because that feeling of the cosmonaut, I have felt it myself sometimes. Yes, what happens when the hose is broken and you keep on floating there. Well, but we've come here now to really try to talk about this enormous challenge, that is the knowledge of the brain. And as happens in astronomy as well, we do recognize that those challenges can only be solved in a global manner with as a collaboration. Today, collaboration, national collaboration, collaboration at the European level as well, but also collaboration, global collaboration worldwide. And we do that, and we are doing it in Europe in a very conscious manner, through the strengthening of the different bonds that we have with the rest of the world, both in infrastructures and in the European values themselves, that we want to be used as a basis for the collaboration. We have had throughout the semester of the Spanish Presidency of the Council of the European Union a whole series of actions. For instance, there has been a lecture in Valencia on precision medicine that has been mentioned here. In October, a lecture on scientific infrastructure in September in Tenerife. The title is Global Dimension Sustainability of the Infrastructures. All this has been done in is very present for us and current for us. And there are also tools that Perellada has mentioned, PERTE, and also the doubt, or rather what we now want is to know what is beyond that. Until now, it's quite clear that the projects have solved and have allowed the research. These are projects that are national in a framework environment. But what else can we do? And we have discovered that many of those projects have their difficulties as well, both in order to obtain them and also the scarce flexibility when we execute a project we have in something apparently so simple as, for instance, defining what do we want to obtain from this project. And we know that anyone who dedicates to research knows that you are unable, or you shouldn't be able to know at the beginning of the project what you are going to reach at the end, because this practically means that you have the result of the project just before they start it, and that's not possible. So we thus need other ways of understanding research and transfer that knowledge to those who do the public policies, and also, of course, to the Commission more particularly. And in the specific issue that we are dealing about today, we have mentioned the issue of resources as well. Resources, the black hole, I also understood that. The fact that everybody needs more and more resources. We know that there is the need to involve the private investment as well, because there is investment that wants to participate. We also know that sometimes the associations, patients' associations themselves are those that are motivating us and are guiding us in the right direction that is needed. A few days ago, we said that in the case of rare diseases, there are more than 7,000 known ones. The patients are those that are pointing at what they need, because nor at the public nor research level we can encompass them all. So that need that all the different stakeholders and members and researchers, doctors, patients, etc., administration work together and that we should do that at the national level, but also at the European level, and of course at the worldwide level as well. For the time being, I'm on your side. It's quite clear, and what we have to do is keep on working together, looking for those solutions that we are demanding. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francisco. And we understand we can find in you a great supporter, but also someone who is ready to be convinced that other fields of science may be as interesting as his first love. That's what I could take. We now have a few minutes in our program for a session of Q&A and opening up the floor with our distinguished audience of today. So I'd like maybe to invite any of you to ask questions or make comments. We only have a couple of minutes before the arrival of our host, the senator who is going to conclude. 15 minutes. So I'll ask you to raise your hand, state your affiliation or where you're coming from, your name, and make your question, let's say, relatively short, but also to make sure that you direct it to the person on our panel. I'm just screening the room, but I don't see any volunteers. Was that clear enough, Stephanie? Yes, please.
Yes, Stephanie Hoffman from Amylyx. I just wanted to take the opportunity to respond to a question addressed for my colleague panel, and we had no time to do that. So I think you were raising a very important point about how come that maybe industry is not as much involved as it could be. And I think what was mentioned by many of the speakers is brain disease are very, very complex disease. And there had been a lot of failures in research, both basic and clinical research. And so a couple of industries disinvest. So what at least we believe would be very important is now there is a momentum. I mean, you hear, I mean, it's fantastic, all of the breakthroughs that are happening now. So we are in a positive momentum. And I think what we need to make sure collectively, all of the stakeholders, is that these positive research are translated into accessible solution to patients, very concrete. And that will attract more investors. Success attracts success. And that's how all together we will be able to get to cures for brain disease. And this is very aspirational, but I just wanted to share our thoughts.
Thank you, Stephanie. Actually, well, that's one of the learnings of when I started theater plays, that when the public reacts, you need to leave that space. So thank you for the applause. No, I just wanted to echo what you were saying, because in preparing for this panel and taking in what was said, I've put on my notes facilitation of dialogue, because that's exactly where I believe an organization like the EBC, like the Spanish Brain Council, can really play their role in bringing all the stakeholders together. That's something that we have heard many, many, many times today. And I know, Mara, you'd like to react on this, but there are plenty of initiatives that the EBC is now facilitating, and the meeting of today is one key example. So, Mara, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much for the comment. I believe it's a very relevant one. But I would like to say something in favor of basic research again. Right now in Europe, most of the programs are applied research, and more so we are more and more reduced to very competitive places in order to keep on with basic research. We even reach situations when they demand you that in 3 years you show how you are going to transfer your basic research to the clinical setting. This is not impossible. Science needs time, and this is something that I would like to point out here, because I think that it's not being taken into account when we establish the policies. We can't let the basic research die or is reduced to just programs of very high excellence in which the critical mass of the scientists, that is the one that is moving science, is lost. This is one. The second one, reacting to what you have said and concerning the partnership, I think it's very important to be global. But that globality, we all should be willing to invest in a similar manner. It can't be that there are countries of first-class countries, second-class countries. What is invested in a country and to stay is not as much as the European countries, and we need investment in science, and I regret to go back to the national part of it. We have to think that if we really want to transfer and to translate, we also want to start thinking about harmonizing at the European level the issues of health and how they are implemented. Mara said that before. But it can't be that mental health depends on your postal code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mara. And we also heard from Professor Obeso that the postal code is not a silver bullet, with the example of Boston, with the high number of neurologists living there. But I'd like to echo what you said on the complexity and need for basic research, addressing societal challenges, and now having to prove impact of, or at the moment of application. Francisco, I don't know if that's something that resonates with you, because I must admit it's one of the issues we've been struggling quite a lot, having to deal with the European Commission and other civil servants in Brussels, that the inclusion of this kind of metrics in the evaluation of research applications was definitely creating an issue. And basically the recognition of science for the purpose of knowledge generation is probably overlooked too often.
Well, as 11 months ago, I was a researcher in astrophysics, writing proposals to the framework programs. It resonates very much in this program. And I have told that we need more flexibility. We need, and it is true, that basic research is valid on its own as one or as a response to our curiosity, beyond the fact that obviously at some point in time it's going to be implemented, as always happens with basic research. So I would say that we can all, and also the member states from the European Union, take part and show upon admission, but also outside our borders, what are our interests. So we are developing the Spanish research, the European research area, and the political agenda. There are a series of actions. Many of those actions really do have an impact on what we are doing here. There are actions as the EOSC on data, infrastructures of data. We have actions on race and even actions on ethical issues. So the professions, not the careers. We are participating in those discussions, and we have the opportunity of showing what are our preferences. It is not easy. It's not simple. We are 27 countries in Europe, plus the Commission, and it is not simple. It's not easy to transmit and convey the messages, but very often, many countries, we have the same messages. So that's where I believe that arises the real possibility of starting changes that are needed. And as we said as well, we have to do the work among all of us. That means that there are mechanisms already at the European level. Maybe they have been mentioned. The partnerships is one that should be mentioned. The partnerships are a possibility that we have so that many countries that are interested can work together, just in order to gather the resources that are required for a problem of this nature.
Thank you, Francisco. And I think we can add to the conclusions and the call to action a takeaway that we could probably link astrophysics and neuroscience, like curiosity, knowledge, or something like that. And we ask Rodrigo, as a Star Wars fan, to coordinate all of that. Is that something we could go for?
Sorry, I missed astrophysics and neuroscience?
No, I said that's Francisco's appeal for fostering curiosity in science. Oh, that we should have a kind of common agenda to really emphasize the need of basic research for the purpose of basic research.
That's the first ingredient of what I believe is a good scientist, curiosity. Always curiosity. But I take, since you mentioned me, I wanted to say, I was debating if I should say this or not, but I just want to fully support what Mara said, because I have been doing this for 20 years, and at the time I started, I had no clue if this can have an impact in clinical research. I was just curious Curiosity was my drive. Now, after 20 years, I can see very clear, I can formulate very clear hypotheses of how could this impact, for example, delay in Alzheimer's disease. And I can tell you very exactly, because now I know a little bit about how memory works, but I didn't know that 20 years ago. So my point is, if you really go for translational neuroscience, you need to have the basic neuroscience. You need to support basic neuroscience, because translational on its own doesn't work. You need both. Thank you.
And as a physicist, it's also intrinsic that you don't know what you are up to when you start an experiment. No, it's okay. We have a few more minutes for last questions or contributions. Ilka, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hilkka Kärkkäinen. I'm an immediate past president of Gamian Europe and also the board member of European Brain Council. I wanted to comment on patient needs because like Professor Komi said, actually patient involvement in research has been quite minor. Well, luckily, it's better today than it was 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was actually only tokenistic. But today, more and more often, patients are involved already earlier and earlier. But I think it's very important to have patients, to get patients involved in the beginning of the research project. And how can that happen is that I think that there are a few things that should be changed, and that is that somehow to really involve patients, you need to speak lay language. And another thing is that when you talk about the whole Europe, there's very often this language barrier as well. And how to solve this problem? It is that you could use more and more patient advisory boards and ask help from patient organizations. For instance, using patient organizations workshops on that and things like that. It's also sometimes very difficult to involve patients because patients have a very high threshold to get involved in research just because of this very specific language. So, and one more thing that I wanted to say is that that patient involvement should be put in the center of European Brain Health Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ilka. And actually, it confirms most of the points that were made earlier today, but I think also feeds into the issue of capacity building, that we should never forget building the capacity of patients to be active members and active partners. I'd like, Mara, I don't know if you had a sign to react on this?
Solamente quería decirle, maybe I speak in English for you. I think that we have advanced a lot, but I think that also as scientists, we also need your support. We need your voice, because it is your voice that will convince the stakeholders that we need more research. And we need your voice for everything, for basic research, for including animals in research, because you understand why, right? And the other thing is, I'm completely in agreement with you. We need to explain things in lay terms. And for example, just to give you an example, we are collaborating with Down Spain. We have a Trisomy 21 Research Society. I'm a basic researcher in Down syndrome. And we have a whole day in our scientific meetings that is devoted to people, to families, to people with Down syndrome. And we ask the researchers to explain in lay terms what are the main findings presented in the meeting, so that people are updated on what is there and they can express their opinion.
Yeah.
And same happens in other societies, ECMP, etc.
Okay, a word of apology to you, Paola, and colleagues on that row, because I was receiving signs, but I cannot see you from here. So I just was told that we have a few more seconds to carry on this discussion, so if you'd like to chip in, but really sorry I cannot see you from here.
Francois, I'm at the extreme on the, you're right. No, I would like just to add a bit of comment, because in my life I condivided the two faces of the coin, that is basic research from one side. I founded the Institute of Experimental Neurology in San Raffaele, Milan, and on the other side I have been deeply involved in clinical trials. So translational medicine has been really the fundamental, let's say, approach. And I think that in parallel with the absolute value of basic research, which is fundamental, what is a bit new, if you like, is that we have to give a lot of value also to the post-approval of disease-modifying treatment, or if you prefer, to what we call now registries or post-approval data. And the reason is that all these neurological and psychiatric disorders are extremely chronic. We are dealing with disease that lasts a life, and sometimes we pretend to understand everything for a couple of years of a clinical trial. So it is very fundamental that we complement results of clinical trials with long-term post-approval observations. And this is where the voice of the patient becomes really fundamental, because it is a very different way to look to a success of a treatment. That is how much really the treatment is able to transform the life of the person with the disease. It's a bit a different, let's say, time-related approach that we have to take into consideration. And I think this is really where, in a symmetrical way to the expansion of the basic research from one side, we have to expand our observation from the other side.
Thank you, Giancarlo. And I was just told that it's now time to wrap up this part of our agenda. And we are now entering into the concluding panel of this session. And I'll ask all the panelists to then step down. Thank you very much.
Buenas tardes a todos y a todas.
Hello. It is an honor for me to chair the closing ceremony and to start the ceremony. Well, I just want to relieve you because I'm not going to be reading anything, although I am holding this folder. Because when a politician says that he's going to be brief, you need to start trembling. Thank you. After this intense and hectic morning, as far as I'm concerned, I would just like to thank the people that made this seminar possible, for starting by Roche and the Pascual Maragall Foundation, and of course the Spanish Senate and the whole of the Senate's staff. They made available this room to us and made it possible for us to hold this event. Of course, I have to mention the kindness of Mr. Fajardo, who came all the way to help us make this event more successful. He had to get up very early this morning, so I'm very thankful to all of you for having come today. And that's all I have to say. I don't know about politicians. I don't know whether politicians speak more than scientists or vice versa. But of course, politicians do not have the benefit of teaching, so when we are given the floor, there is no stopping us. But anyway, I would like to thank all the people I mentioned for their kindness, and I would also like to thank you all for having spent the morning with us. Thank you. Thank you, Juan, for your kind words. And now I will give the floor to Professor Dixon, who is going to address you.
Your Excellency and dear friends and colleagues, it's been an absolutely fantastic meeting. At the European Brain Council, we strongly advocate for research, and we aim to bring stakeholders together that work and live in the brain space. This has been a high-level meeting. We've heard many excellent examples of the way in which brain research can develop. We've seen pictures of neurons dating back centuries, and we've seen the most modern technologies and innovations. Progress has been made, and progress continues to be made. And there are many hopeful examples on the horizon. But there's no quick fix. There are no shortcuts. We need commitment and investment in research, basic research, clinical and translational research. So, on a message of hope at the end of the meeting, I would say that we researchers were able to deliver, but we need to be able to continue the freedom of research idea and innovation in order to impact on brain disease, neurological and mental alike. We need to be free to develop our ideas and to explore them as part of a big brain community, which you are all engaged. I thank you. I don't have more to say. It's been a fabulous meeting. I thank all the speakers and all the participants, and it's been a wonderful morning here at the Senate. We thank all those also who are online for their participation. So I wish you a good afternoon, and thank you for participating in this event. It's been really amazing. Thank you.
And now to conclude, I will just take the floor to say good morning or good afternoon to all of you. I am a senator from the island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. That's why I had to get up at 5 o'clock this morning to be here with all of you. First of all, I wanted to excuse my colleague and second Vice President of the Senate, Dr. Guillermo Fernandez Vara, who, for personal reasons, has not been able to come. So welcome to the Spanish Senate. This is a building that belongs to all the Spanish citizens, and it is an honor for me to address you and say a few words to you. As I said, I will not read, and we're very honored that you chose the Senate as the venue to hold this meeting on brain research. And as Professor Dixon was saying, this shows the high scientific level and the big commitment that the different stakeholders have with achieving the best health outcomes in patients with brain disorders. Prevention and health promotion and the fight against prevalent diseases, including health diseases, including brain diseases, is paramount, both for neuronal and mental disorders. And the data are blood-curdling, and I have to admit that I was not aware of the data. When you say that there's almost 1 billion people in the world that have some neurological disorder, 790 million people suffering mental disease, and this is data from 2019. So this is data from before the COVID-19 pandemic. So, and you know, a high prevalence of anxiety and depression, and only in Europe, approximately, according to the data, 60% of the population live with some neurological disorder, and 1 in every 6 citizens in Europe have a mental disorder. Well, this is blood-curdling data, and I'm sure that most of the population are oblivious to this information. So, you know, that's why this seminar was extremely important. So it is extremely important to study, investigate, and raise awareness about these problems, and you know, no resources should be spared, because resources are indispensable to design innovative and personalized treatments to address this pandemic, because it is a pandemic, and it has been defined as a pandemic. For all the reasons above, and for your effort and dedication, I just want to thank you all very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much to the European Brain Council, particularly to Professor Dixon and Juan Lerma. I also want to thank the other organizers mentioned by Juan in his words, also other speakers and attendees to this seminar. And now I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.